Good morning, everybody. Excellencies, distinguished participants, I hereby declare open the 39th meeting of the 51st session of the Human Rights Council. And this is the last meeting before the voting. Excellencies, distinguished participants, we will now resume with the presentation of the High Commissioner's report on technical assistance and capacity building for Yemen in the field of human rights and on cooperation with Georgia, and of the Secretary General report on advisory services and technical assistance for Cambodia. According to our practice, we shall start by hearing the delegation of the country concerned by the reports, and you have 5 minutes. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cambodia. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Vice President. Cambodia's positive engagement with the OSHO is well recognized in the Secretary General report. We appreciate this opportunity to reflect the work of the OSHO, including its provision of technical assistance to the governmental and non-governmental institutions to promote and protect human rights. We know that the report recognizes in a very brief and narrow scope certain positive elements, namely poverty reduction, progress in draft law on national human rights institution, tracking system of the criminal case data, rising legal aid budget, steps toward parallel implementation, social protection schemes for vulnerable groups during the pandemic, and the progress in addressing discrimination against LGBTIQ. Despite the government's genuine dialogues, we regret that the report does not set the record straight on many fronts. The report contains several factual errors despite our comments provided. Cambodia's June communal election is a renewed testimony of multi-party democracy and pluralism, as 9 out of 17 contesting parties have won the communal council seat across the country. The voting process was characterized as a free, fair, orderly, peaceful, and transparent by national and international observers and many contesting parties. The alleged delisting of about 300 opposition candidates during the recent voting and the figures of the non-party electoral observer affiliated with the ruling party lacks clear content and due references. To say that the decisions of the electoral committee are not subject to appeal is unfounded. The fact is that decisions of the election committee at both communal and provincial levels can be appealed to the National Election Committee. The appeal system is non-discriminatory. The National Election Committee ruled in favor of an appeal of opposition candidates to cancel a monetary fine and to retain the right to vote and stand for election of 15 opposition candidates. The OSHO documented alleged intimidation and arrest of candidates, activists, and political supporters is a one-sided presentation. The detailed documentation should require genuine dialogues and careful consideration of viewpoints of all parties, including authority concerned, if we are to achieve a credible and objective report. Regrettably, the OSHO fails to do so. The truth is that all charges brought before the courts involved criminal and constitutional breach. All rights and freedom are not absolute. The defendant had full opportunity to be heard, including rights to counsel, to dispute the charges against them, and to present the arguments in the court as part of the rights to due process guaranteed by the Constitution. We also urge the OSHO to rely on data of highest and unimpeachable qualities and avoid anecdote or incidental evidences when assessing human rights allegations. We regret that the OSHO cannot provide a medical proof in support of a 17-year-old boy that it advocated for having autism. The OSHO claimed that the Naga casino workers' strike is lawful is belied with the court ruling having declared unlawful since last December. Any alleged violence, harassment, and unequipped quarantine facility should be assessed with rigor and verification. The OSHO in August 2022 welcomed the positive development as freedom of assembly of the former casino workers was guaranteed. The government remained committed to the biannual partnership forum with the CSOs, a platform that the alleged interferences facing the NGO are addressed. A working group to amend the NGO law has recently been concluded. An internal review of the 14 articles proposed for the amendment, with the next consultative workshop with the CSO to take place later this year. The reach of critical media is extensive and is further intensified by our lowest mobile internet costs compared to in the region. The OSHO should no longer condone dangerous politics of certain opposition elements engaging in hate speech, xenophobia, disinformation, and provocation of sedition under the disguise of freedom of expression. Cambodia has embarked on transformative social protection scheme in support of women, job-suspended workers, and the vulnerable groups during the pandemic. A new pension scheme for private sector employees and the recent expansion of the coverage of the National Social Security Fund to the families of the members are to be implemented this year. Yesterday, my government put into place a cash transfer program for at-risk households during the high inflation. Cambodia has no policy of forced eviction. Cambodia expropriation law defines the principle, mechanism, procedure, and of expropriation and a fair, just compensation for any public physical infrastructure construction and expansion project for the public interest. Progress has also been made in registration of indigenous community land. As of June this year, nearly 1,000 collective ownership titles of close to 40 indigenous communities have been registered and issued, covering a total area of nearly 40,000 hectares. The government remains committed to registering 10 indigenous communities with a collective land titles per year. In closing, Cambodia remains resolute in our firm commitment in cooperation with all stakeholders to continuing to promote and protect human rights within the rule of law, advance sustainable development, uphold our hard-won peace, and pursue our irreversible democratic journey with pluralism, including the election next year. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Georgia, Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Let me start by thanking the High Commissioner and the Office for the report cooperation with Georgia. It is well reflected in the document. Russia's illegal occupation of Abkhazia and Sinhala regions of Georgia continues to have severe impact on population living therein and areas adjacent to the occupation line. They are suffering from illegal militarization, installation of artificial barriers, and ever-increasing human rights violations, inter alia kidnappings, arbitrary detentions, torture and ill treatment, deprivation of life, infringement of right of property and violation of right to health, restriction on education in native language, and ethnic discrimination. Alarmingly, devastating impacts of Russia's occupation are being felt even more painfully by vulnerable communities, such as women and children, older persons and persons with disabilities. The report speaks about the consequences of the restrictions of freedom of movement on the physical and mental state of older persons. It underscores the increased level of gender-based violence on conflict-affected women and girls in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. The report also notes the existing difficulties in addressing the basic needs of persons with disabilities residing in the occupied territories. Herewith, let me recall the decision of the European Court of Human Rights, which legally attested Russia's occupation and effective control over Abkhazia and Sinhala regions of Georgia, and ruled Russia's responsibility for violation of fundamental norms of the international law, including a number of articles of the European Convention on Human Rights on the ground. Furthermore, the recent decision of the International Criminal Court on issuing arrest warrants for the individuals bearing criminal responsibility for the war crimes committed during 2008 Georgia-Russian war clearly confirms that Russia is responsible for gross violations committed against the Georgian population. Hundreds of thousands of IDPs and refugees expelled from the both occupied regions are deprived by the Russia's occupying power of their fundamental right to return to their homes in safety and dignity. Russia's continuous destructive actions in occupied territories put many more at risk of becoming IDPs. The Russian occupation regime continues its deliberate policy to drive ethnic Georgians out of Abkhazia and Sinhala regions by prohibiting education in native Georgian language. According to the report of the Commissioner, more than 4,000 school children and around 600 children at kindergartens in Gali district are deprived of their right to receive education in their native Georgian language. Unfortunately, similar pattern is being repeated in the Sinhala region. As a continuation of a destructive practice by occupation regime, uses kidnappings and illegal detentions to further destabilize already existing grave situation on the ground. Currently, Georgian citizens Irakli Bebua, Kakhaber Natadze, Christine Takalandze, and Mamuka Chikwadze remain in illegal custody of the occupation forces, among others. Regrettably, some of them are with severe health conditions. Unfortunately, we have witnessed tragic consequences of illegal detentions and kidnappings, like in the tragic case of Gennady Bestayev. He died in February 2022, after 3 months of being released from the custody of Sinhala occupation forces due to his critically deteriorated health conditions. Alarmingly, justice still has not been served for the deprivation of life of David Basharuli, Gigaot Khozoria, and Archil Tatunashvili, and as well as for the death of Irakli Kvaratskhelia. Regrettably, such impunity has led to the death of Inal Jabiev on 28 August 2020, who was a victim of torture while illegally detained in the Russia-occupied Sinhala region. Madam Vice President, notwithstanding the repeated calls by this Council, the Russia's occupying power continues to prevent the OHCHR and other international human rights monitoring mechanisms from entering both Russian-occupied regions of Georgia. Let me underline the vital importance of the consolidated approach of the international community to firmly remind the Russian Federation of its responsibility to comply with the EU-mediated 2008 ceasefire agreement, withdraw its military forces from the territory of Georgia, allow international security and human rights mechanisms on the ground, and cease human rights violations therein. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Yemen, Ambassador.
Madam President, at the outset, I would like to commend and congratulate Mr. Volker-Turk on his appointment as High Commissioner for Human Rights. We wish him all success, and we appreciate the tremendous efforts deployed by Ms. Beshley, the outgoing High Commissioner, and wish her the best in her future endeavors. We have taken due consideration of the OHCHR report on technical assistance, to which we have responded in writing under item 10. We appreciate the efforts undertaken to put together a report and the praise of the report of the positive role of the National Commission of Inquiry, given the fact that it has improved its performance and quality of reporting. However, I would like to make certain observations, particularly when it comes to the highlighting of the crimes perpetrated by the Houthis. The National Yemeni Commission of Inquiry is an independent mechanism that receives all cooperation and facilities to realize truth and administer justice as per the positive evaluation of the successive reports of the OHCHR in 3 years. Yet again proves that this commission must continue its mandate. Madam President, the political parties in Yemen, youth and women and civil society actors have participated last March in Riyadh under the sponsorship of the GCC Secretariat in consultations on the different aspects that are of concern to Yemen. Mr. Rashad al-Ailami has taken over power in Yemen with a view to realizing peace and security in Yemen. There would be a broad reform process that will not touch only the interior aspect in Yemen, but also the foreign relations, along with the mutual commitments and most notably human rights, which will be re-examined, and improved policies and positions that have instrumentalized the suffering of Yemeni people will be re-examined publicly and transparently, particularly those used by international and regional organizations that led to wider crimes against the violations against the rights of our people that were committed by the terrorist radical Houthis. The Presidential Leadership Council has taken the first steps to form the Supreme Judicial Council and appointing a new Attorney General, which is yet another proof to administer justice and activate the state constitutions, being one of the most important tasks of the state. In response to the international and regional efforts, Yemen has seen a humanitarian truce for 6 months. The government of Yemen has committed to implementing all provisions including an all-out ceasefire and allowing commercial air flights from Sana'a airport and allowing oil tankers through the Hodeida and Sulaif airports. However, the Houthi militias rejected to implement the truce, and it has made breaches and terrorist attacks that led to claiming the lives of 300 servicemen and civilians and injuring a large number of people, including women and children in Taiz. It has also targeted a medical team in Taiz. It also refused to open roads between the different Yemeni cities, particularly lifting the siege on Taiz. In addition to the continued violations of Stockholm Agreement that has culminated in an armed parade by the militias in Al-Hodeida, in addition to a number of other armed parades across the country. These violations have been met by a disgraceful silence by the international bodies that are controlling and supervising the truce. It is well known that failing to punish evil is tantamount to encouraging evil. The militias has rejected to renew and extend the truce starting the 2nd of October 2022. And this is yet another proof of the ineffective policy taken by the Special Rapporteur's Office in addressing the breaches of the Houthis. It is high time to come out of the considerations that only see the Yemeni people through the lens of the conflicts in the region. All the necessary measures must be taken to realize peace and security in Yemen and to get rid of the blackmail of such terrorist militias. Human rights reports have tackled the breaches committed by the Houthi militias in the areas under its control, including indoctrination of young children, recruitment of children, as well as arbitrary detention and enforced disappearances. It has also fought media by all means, including assassination. Most recent incidents was the assassination of Judge Hamran in Sana'a. Sham and kangaroo trials are being staged to hand down the extreme punishments against critics. 4 journalists are still in the death row. In this context, we call upon the international community and the Human Rights Council to bring the Houthis to trial and to restore constitutional legitimacy to Yemen. In conclusion, we call upon the Human Rights Council to examine human rights situation in Yemen under Item 10, given the fact that technical assistance must be provided to Yemen so that the government will be able to fulfill its obligations in the human rights field, and to continue working for realizing accountability and administering justice in Yemen. We look forward to working with the incoming High Commissioner and the Human Rights Council member countries in order to protect and promote human rights. Thank you.
And this brings us to the end of this presentation, and I wish to thank Mr. Francesco Motta for his participation and contribution yesterday, of course. Excellencies, distinguished participants, we shall now begin the general debate under agenda item 10. And may I inform you that, as always, the list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. Before we start, let me remind you that all requests for a right to reply relating to statements delivered during this general debate will be accommodated before the closure of this item. And I would also kindly like to remind all speakers to comply to the allocated speaking time, and this might enable us a short lunch break. As practiced, the full statements will be uploaded on the extranet, and I thank you for your understanding and cooperation. We shall now, with a list of speakers of members of the Council, and I have the honor to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Czechia on behalf of the European Union. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Madam Vice President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union. North Macedonia, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Liechtenstein align themselves with this declaration. We commend the OHCHR's engagement and dialogue with states, regional organizations, and other stakeholders in carrying out its technical cooperation mandate. We call on all states to fully cooperate with and support the office by providing it with adequate financial resources and by ensuring that all conditions are met to allow UN human rights staff to independently exercise their functions. In Yemen, the EU is deeply disappointed by the inability to reach an agreement on the extension of the truce. We welcome technical assistance and capacity building, but this remains an inappropriate response to one of the worst human rights crises on the globe. We have therefore called for a dedicated discussion by this Council, and we encourage the international community to seek options to prevent human rights violations and address impunity. The EU is concerned about the deteriorating situation in Haiti, including human rights violations and abuses. We call on all stakeholders to engage in a constructive dialogue on ways of de-escalating the situation. We remain ready to assist Haitians to reinforce their democratic institutions and the rule of law. The EU encourages Georgia to redouble its efforts to strengthen the rule of law, the independence, integrity and accountability of the judiciary and the fight against corruption. In Georgian regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, we urge those exercising effective control to grant unimpeded access to the OHCHR and other international human rights mechanisms. We firmly reject and condemn the illegal annexation by Russia of Ukraine's Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, and we reiterate that it's the legal obligation of all UN members to do the same. We do not and will never recognize the illegal sham referenda conducted by Russia in these regions in violation of the UN Charter and their falsified outcome. The decisions taken on the basis of this outcome are null and void and cannot produce any legal effect whatsoever. The EU welcomes the Philippines' commitment to engage in technical cooperation under the UN Joint Programme and hopes that this will effectively contribute to improving the situation. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Pakistan on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The OIC recognizes the significance of the Council's technical assistance mandate. We believe that this mandate provides a vital toolkit to foster genuine dialogue and constructive engagement among states, OHCHR and HRC's allied mechanisms. To ensure its effective and optimal use, technical assistance should be provided in consultation with and with consent of the concerned state, as stipulated in the UNGA Resolution 60/251. Regrettably, this cardinal principle is being undermined. In many cases, states have demonstrated willingness to address global concerns over human rights, including through requests for technical assistance. Instead of responding positively, intrusive countermeasures have been applied on them. Such an approach undermines the basic principles and purposes of the UN Charter and must be avoided. Madam Vice President, in view of their interdependent, interrelated and mutually reinforcing relationship, technical assistance should target all human rights on the same footing and with the same emphasis. Unfortunately, inequitable resource allocation has constrained OHCHR's ability to focus on all human rights equally. The donors-driven agenda has further aggravated the problem. The OIC therefore calls for equitable resource allocation, focusing on all basic rights, political, social, economic and cultural rights, as well as building necessary firewalls against the distortion caused by voluntary and earmarked contributions. Madam Vice President, to build back better, stronger, a fundamental shift in thinking, approach and orientation is required. It is clear from the human rights consequences of the COVID pandemic that pursuit of selective approaches is detrimental, and that investments in sustainable development is a catalyst for human rights promotion. We hope that these hard-learned lessons should lead to reorienting the focus of Council's technical cooperation mandate towards addressing structural inequalities. In this connection, the OIC draws attention towards the needs and predicament of developing countries which continue to disproportionately endure socio-economic shocks of the pandemic. We call on the Council to utilize its technical assistance mandate to support these countries in their domestic efforts to safeguard and advance basic rights of their citizens, including the right to equitable and timely access to affordable COVID vaccines, revival of livelihoods, provision of health services, food security, and fostering of sustainable development. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the State of Palestine on behalf of a group of Arab states.
شكرا سيدة نائبة الرئيس. Thank you, Madam Vice President. I am pleased to be delivering the speech on behalf of the Arab Group. The Arab Group recognizes the importance of technical assistance and capacity building in the area of human rights, particularly concerning developing countries, island developing countries as well, because this helps these countries to consolidate their progress in the area of human rights. It is essential to continue this assistance to countries facing challenges and suffering from certain difficulties in several spheres that could be adverse to human rights development. And we call upon the office to provide the technical assistance and capacity building to these countries that is required so that they can live up to these challenges in the area of human rights. The Arab Group would like to reaffirm the need to come to the aid of through funds for technical assistance. We welcome all of the interventions by this fund. It is vital to focus on strengthening capacity and avoiding any politicization under this article. It is important to give technical assistance with a view to strengthening partnership and positive cooperation and exchanges of experience and ensuring that lessons are learned. It's also essential to recall that the country mandates must be carried out in consultation with the countries concerned, and they should confine themselves to the purpose for which they were established, and thus to strengthen human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Côte d'Ivoire on behalf of the Group of African States.
Merci, Madame la Vice-Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. It is my honor to be speaking on behalf of the Group of African Countries. The African Group welcomes the work done by the Human Rights Council and the High Commissioner's Office for Human Rights in the area of technical assistance and capacity building. As we see it, this helps to maintain a constant dialogue between the Council and states. The African Group feels that each request is unique and should be adapted to the context. In this respect, the technical cooperation provided should be guided by technical assistance programs so as to better meet the needs of the day and the necessities and specificities of the requesting countries. The African Group recalls its appeal to have periodic assessment mechanisms which are transparent of technical assistance programs so as to make the field operations more effective. The African Group believes that any capacity building must be from a global, comprehensive approach so as to allow for the achievement of the SDGs. The African Group commends the commitment of the voluntary funds work for technical assistance with a view to implementing the recommendations that have come out of the Universal Periodic Review, particularly to benefit the least developed countries and small island developing countries, which have been making these requests over the last 15 years. Along these lines, the African Group would also like to welcome the work of the United Nations Special Trust Fund for voluntary technical assistance to LDCs and the developing countries to strengthen the work of the Human Rights Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Azerbaijan on behalf of the non-aligned movement.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the non-aligned movement. In view of the non-aligned movement, general debate under Agenda Item 10 is an essential platform for states to share their visions and views to promote more effective technical cooperation and capacity building in the field of human rights. It's also a good opportunity for states to share concrete experiences, challenges and information on assistance needed in the implementation of their human rights obligations and commitments, as well as the recommendations they have accepted in the Universal Periodic Review process. NAM recalls that providing advisory services, technical and financial assistance at the request of the state concerned and with a view to supporting their actions and programs in the field of human rights is one of the responsibilities of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Office. Technical assistance and capacity building also constitute an essential component of the Human Rights Council. NAM emphasizes that the enhancement of international cooperation aimed at strengthening the respect of states is essential for the effective promotion and protection of human rights and implementation of the 23rd Agenda for Sustainable Development. In this regard, NAM is of the view that both the Human Rights Council and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights should increase their efforts in providing advisory services, capacity building and technical assistance to states upon their request and according to their national needs and priorities to ensure the realization of all universally recognized human rights and fundamental freedoms. In conclusion, we reiterate that all human rights, including the right to development, are universal, inalienable, indivisible, interdependent and interrelated. With this in mind, the technical cooperation and capacity building activities by the Human Rights Council and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights should have an equal focus on civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Saudi Arabia on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Ambassador.
شكرا سيدنا نائب الرئيس تقدم.
Thank you, Vice President. I deliver this statement on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council. We welcome the report and the work in the field to bring a stop to human rights violations. Commission of inquiry should try to find evidence in line with international standards. We've taken note of the rapporteur's statement on cooperation with Yemen. We believe that further technical assistance should be given to the National Human Rights Committee in Yemen so that it can pursue its efforts with transparency and achieve its aims. We welcome the Yemeni government's efforts because it has persevered with the ceasefire and has witnessed a number of ceasefire violations being committed by the Houthi militia groups. They have failed to fully respect the ceasefire and have hampered humanitarian work. The Gulf Cooperation Council provides technical cooperation to Yemen. Yemen is particularly dependent on such assistance. We welcome Yemen's presence here because it reflects its commitment to peace and stability. We encourage the United Nations, all its member states, to find a political solution to the Yemen situation and that this be based on the recommendations from Resolution 23/10. And we support all efforts to promote peace and stability in Yemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Cambodia on behalf of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Ambassador.
Thank you once again, Madam Vice President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. The full text is uploaded on the extranet. ASEAN believes that general debate and thematic panel discussion under Agenda Item 10 provide a platform of genuine dialogue on promotion and protection of human rights. The OHCHR should make use of this platform, the platforms like this one, to further enhance the visibility of technical cooperation toward promoting and harnessing robust, well-resourced channels through which states can solicit assistance. To create tangible results on the ground, technical cooperation must be tailored to the country's needs and priorities, and based on the consultations with and the consent of the state concerned. This would enhance national ownership and effort toward the implementation in a sustainable manner. UN agencies, especially UN country teams, should integrate technical cooperation on human rights into their works and programs and consult state in its implementation to create high degree of complementarity with national efforts. ICHA, our regional human rights body, has been working on mainstreaming human rights into ASEAN work. ICHA has organized meetings on issues, including the rights to an effective remedy, human rights, and SDG 11, with participation of and support from various stakeholders. In closing, ASEAN reaffirms its commitment to working with other states and partners to advance technical cooperation in pursuit of the full enjoyment of human rights by all. I thank you.
Thank you. And may I inform you that the list of speakers is now closed. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba on behalf of a group of countries.
Gracias, Vicepresidenta.
Thank you, Vice President. It's my honour to deliver this statement on behalf of a group of countries. The full list will be published on the extranet. We welcome constructive technical cooperation and the Cambodian government's commitment to work with the office. The High Commissioner and the office should work on the basis of universality, objectivity, transparency and non-selectivity. All human rights, be they civil, political, economic, social and cultural, including the right to development, should be dealt with fairly and equally on the same footing with the same emphasis as well. We congratulate Cambodia on having achieved almost universal vaccination against COVID-19 and for having rolled out various social protection measures to support women, workers and vulnerable groups during the pandemic. Cambodia's progress in increasing female representation in the civil service, in demining and fostering entrepreneurial spirit must be recognised. We should also recognise achievements in the high literacy rate, reducing maternal and child mortality and reducing overcrowding in homes. We welcome Cambodia's efforts to create a conducive environment for expanding political space in the approach of the elections. Free, fair and peaceful local elections have occurred. There is a dynamic media and there is free exercise of trade union business. The technical cooperation should also be based on requests and with the full agreement of the country concerned. It should be in line with national priorities and efforts to implement accepted recommendations in the UPR. It should not be used as a tool for political agendas or as a pretext for interfering in domestic affairs. Lastly, it's absolutely vital that the Office of the High Commissioner discharge its mandate in line with the relevant resolution which established the office under the framework of the UN Charter and in view of national sovereignty of each state. Any evidence should be properly checked and any responses from the state to allegations should be taken into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Brazil on behalf of a group of countries. Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of Argentina, Canada, Chile, Ecuador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Peru, the United States, Uruguay, and my own country, Brazil. In line with the recent comments by the acting High Commissioner at the beginning of the current HRC session, we are deeply concerned about the rising levels of violence in Haiti, involving gangs and other armed criminal groups. Unless urgent action is taken at the domestic front, the deteriorating circumstances on the ground threaten to overwhelm state institutions and undermine the human rights and humanitarian situation in the country. We are alarmed by the reports about systemic attacks by criminal gangs, especially on women and girls and on humanitarian assets, which may hamper the ability of international agencies to operate in the country. We are especially concerned about the state of affairs in the prison and justice systems. We are committed to continue engaging with Haiti at all levels to build the necessary consensus to address the current crisis and promote sustainable solutions. To that effect, we reaffirm our support for meaningful and effective dialogue between the government, political parties and civil society in Haiti in order to agree on concrete steps to combat the escalating violence and protect human rights on the ground. We reiterate the need for a Haitian-led political process to conduct inclusive, peaceful, free, fair and transparent legislative and presidential elections as soon as security conditions and logistical preparations permit. In this regard, we call on the Office of the High Commissioner to redouble efforts of technical cooperation and assistance to Haiti, as well as humanitarian assistance provided by the appropriate UN agencies in order to support the country to face the complex situation on the ground from a human rights and sustainable development perspective. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cabo Verde on behalf of the community of Portuguese language countries. Ambassador.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Vice President. It's my honour to deliver this statement in Portuguese on behalf of the community of Portuguese-speaking countries, the CPLP. The CPLP thanks the Acting High Commissioner for the reports presented here and for the important contributions they make to our debate on technical assistance and capacity building in the field of human rights. We welcome and encourage the constant efforts made by the High Commissioner to try and promote human rights where these efforts are most needed. The CPLP unreservedly supports the Human Rights Council's mandate to provide technical assistance and capacity building. This is achieved through the Voluntary Fund for Technical Cooperation, amongst other initiatives. This is an important tool for promoting and protecting human rights by capacity building in states so that they can prevent human rights abuses and fulfill their obligations in this area. Thus, in order to achieve all human rights, we believe that the Council and the High Commissioner should step up initiatives to provide advisory services as well as financial and technical assistance to states when requested to do so and in line with national priorities and needs. Lastly, we would like to underscore the CPLP's commitment to pursue cooperation amongst its members and through technical cooperation to contribute to achieving the commitments under various treaties to promote and protect human rights. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of France. Ambassador.
Merci, Madame la...
Thank you, Vice President. France resolutely supports technical cooperation and capacity building led by the High Commissioner for Human Rights. This is a vital component of the United Nations human rights system. France continues to be convinced of the advantages of these operations, and thus we contribute to the Voluntary Fund for Technical Cooperation and for implementing the UPR recommendations, as well as the Assistance Fund for promoting the participation of small island developing states and least developing countries in the Council's work. We also call for the regular budget of the High Commissioner to be increased. We also would like to reiterate our commitment to efforts to promote greater linguistic diversity in the High Commissioner's office so that teams can fully understand the contexts in which they work. I'd like to refer to some of the situations in which the office provides essential support. France closely follows the preparation of the general elections in Cambodia in 2023. They must be open, pluralist, and whilst we've seen a shrinking of civic space in recent years, which is of concern to us, we encourage the Cambodian government to hold a credible, open and transparent election. In the Philippines, we've taken note of the new government's commitment to pursue the United Nations joint programme, which was signed with the previous administration. We call for it to be fully implemented by the authorities, particularly in the fight against impunity. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, France thanks the international team of experts and welcomes the vital role played by MINUSCA to stabilise the country in the face of growing violence in the east of the country. We support the transitional justice process, which should help quell tensions. Thank you very much.
Finland, Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Finland aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. Finland welcomes the cooperation of states and national stakeholders with the OHCHR and other UN human rights mechanisms to strengthen the promotion and protection of human rights. We encourage states to contribute to the Voluntary Fund for Technical Cooperation. Finland encourages the Philippines to implement the mandate of the national level UN Joint Programme on Human Rights effectively and in full. It is crucial for the success of this programme that civil society organisations from diverse backgrounds can participate in its work in a full, equal and meaningful way. We are deeply concerned about the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Yemen and the continued grave human rights violations. Finland calls on all parties to intensify their efforts under the auspices of the United Nations to agree on an expanded truce that could lead the way towards a durable ceasefire and a comprehensive political settlement. We fully support the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia. We continue the non-recognition policy of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, where the humanitarian needs are pressing and multiple discrimination continues to prevail. We have serious concerns about prolonged restrictions on freedom of movement, right to health, and the rights to education and property in these regions. We welcome the continued cooperation of the Democratic Republic of the Congo with a team of international experts and encourage the implementation of the team's recommendations. Preventing impunity for human rights violations and abuses is key. We encourage the government to take into consideration victims' needs for protection, assistance and reparation in the transitional justice process. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Lithuania Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Lithuania aligns itself with the statement of the European Union, and Lithuania appreciates the work of the OHCHR in the field of technical assistance and capacity building, aiming to strengthen the implementation of states' human rights obligations and commitments. In this regard, Lithuania appreciates strong cooperation between the government of Georgia and the OHCHR and welcomes the government's efforts to further promote and protect human rights. We welcome the progress towards adoption of the new National Human Rights Strategy for the period 2022-2030, as well as positive developments on the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We encourage Georgia to continue to implement the recommendations outlined in the High Commissioner's report, particularly regarding the independence of the judiciary, fight against corruption, and combat gender-based discrimination and violence. Lithuania remains deeply worried about the persisting human rights violations in the Georgian regions of Abkhazia and Sinhala, South Ossetia, occupied by Russia. The OHCHR documented arbitrary deprivations of liberty and ill treatment, restrictions of freedom of movement, and the right to education and property, as well as other rights. We are deeply concerned that the Office and other international and regional human rights mechanisms continue to face denial of access to Abkhazia and Sinhala, South Ossetia. We repeatedly call on the authorities exercising control of both regions to grant unimpeded access to all relevant human rights monitoring mechanisms to these regions, and to ensure investigation of all allegations of human rights violations with full accountability and in compliance with the ruling of the European Court of Human Rights. Lithuania reiterates its unwavering support for the sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of Georgia within its internationally recognized borders. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Cuba, Ambassador.
Gracias, Vicepresidenta.
Thank you, Vice President. Cuba reiterates its concern that debates under this agenda item are being used to single out countries, particularly developing countries, using technical assistance and capacity building in the area of human rights as a pretext. We must put a stop to this selective and discriminatory approach. It would seem as though only developing countries need cooperation in the field of human rights, but that is far removed from reality. These debates must focus on technical cooperation initiatives for the many challenges faced by developed countries in achieving fundamental human rights, including economic, social, cultural, civil and political rights. Madam Vice President, Resolution 60/251, which established this council, sets out that this body must promote the provision of technical assistance and capacity building in consultation with and with the technical with the consent, of the member states concerned. On this basis, one can conclude that it's the sovereign state of any state to put an end to the cooperation within its borders when it considers the time is right. Furthermore, Cuba calls for an end to using technical assistance to promote the political agenda of donors. We call for the principles of cooperation and technical assistance in the founding documents of the Council to be respected and prevent this agenda item from being used for politicisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I now give the floor to Venezuela.
Gracias, Vicepresidenta.
Thank you, Vice President. Venezuela endorses the statement made by Azerbaijan on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Promoting protecting human rights should be based on genuine dialogue and cooperation in order to build states' capacities so that they can meet their commitments in this area. The international community should contribute to improve the humanitarian situation so that civilians are not affected. Cambodia has made a great deal of progress. Its government is committed to promoting all human rights. This is reflected in its open cooperation with the Council, its mechanisms and the Office of the High Commissioner. The aim of item 10 is to build capacity in the area of human rights through technical assistance and building capacity in consultation with and with the consent of the state concerned. We should try to find solutions to meet the aspirations of people to reduce inequalities and empower the most vulnerable. This can be achieved through social investment in priority areas such as health, education and food. It's only through international solidarity and cooperation and respecting sovereignty and the principle of non-interference in the domestic affairs of states, which are enshrined in the United Charter, will we be able to make effective progress in achieving human rights around the world. Politicization, selectivity and double standards go against these aims, but that's what we see in this council targeting the countries of the South. We must put a stop to the use of illegal coercive measures which are used by dominant powers. This prevents cooperation and undermines people's welfare, causing untold suffering. On the other hand, what we should do is we should attend to the requests of developing countries, provide the necessary means through international cooperation and solidarity at their request in consultation with them and with the consent of the state concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Libya.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. My delegation endorses the statements delivered on behalf of groups to which we belong. We appreciate technical assistance and capacity building missions. They have a positive impact on human rights. States have greater capacity so that they themselves can fulfill the obligations they have under international treaties. But at the same time, it's absolutely vital that the Council assumes its obligations at the request of countries for technical assistance and capacity building. The cultural, social context of each country must be taken into consideration. There should not be any selectivity or politicization. Technical assistance must be based on impartiality. There's been cooperation between the office and Libya and Yemen. This is based on transparency. Technical assistance and capacity building must help countries fulfill their obligations under international treaties and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. In conclusion, my country remains committed to the human rights mechanisms, and we call upon the Council to continue to provide technical assistance and capacity building, in particular in the area of justice and law enforcement. We support efforts to strengthen national institutions despite the challenges faced in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Luxembourg Ambassador.
Merci, Madame la.
Thank you, Vice President. Luxembourg fully endorses the statement made by the European Union. My delegation thanks the High Commissioner for these reports on technical cooperation and capacity building efforts in a number of countries. Resolution 60/251 sets out that the aim of the Council is to promote technical assistance and capacity building, which is to be provided in consultation with and with the consent of member states concerned. My country remains deeply committed to this central role of the Council. Our development cooperation, which is over 1% of gross national income, focuses on human rights. Draft Resolution 51 Rev 1, submitted by Thailand and a group of co-sponsors, proposes that a half-day meeting be held between the 52nd and 53rd sessions of the Council to reflect on technical cooperation. We also welcome Draft Resolution L1 submitted by Paraguay and Brazil, which underscores the importance of national cooperation mechanisms for implementing human rights obligations. My delegation is a co-sponsor of these two draft resolutions, and we encourage all other countries to do the same. In addition to the positive experiences of the High Commissioner and other UN entities in contributing to strengthening national capacity in the area of human rights, we're forced to acknowledge that there are a number of situations where item 10 doesn't go far enough. The situation in Yemen is one of them. Despite national authorities' efforts, the conflict means that we can't just have an independent expert reporting to the Council. We are particularly disappointed to note the refusal of a number of groups of co-sponsors to incorporate proposals made by the European Union. The Houthis have failed to renew the ceasefire, and that threatens civilians in Yemen. So the EU's proposals would have strengthened the observation dimension on human rights, as well as providing accounts to the Council. My delegation hopes that the country will nevertheless manage to maintain peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the United Arab Emirates.
السيد الرئيس ينضم وفد بلادي إلى بيانات
Thank you. The delegation of my country supports the statement delivered by the groups we belong to, and stresses the importance of Decree 9 of September 2021, which extended the mandate of inquiry for 2 more years to study the human rights situation. Given that it enjoys independence and impartiality, not only the agreement signed between the Transitional Council of the South and the government, we also commend the establishment of the Leadership Council, Presidential Leadership Council, and we call for continued negotiations with the Houthis to arrive at a comprehensive peace agreement in Yemen on the basis of Security Council Resolution 2216 of 2015 and 2451 of 2018 and 2624, as well as support for the initiatives of the Gulf Cooperation Council to implement recommendations that are in the final document of the Conference of National Dialogue. It is vital to support efforts for extending the truce or renewing it, which managed to survive the last 6 months. It is essential to refrain from any provocation or any act which might further heighten tension. And we call upon the Council to work to bring about a peace agreement while taking into account the prime interests of the Yemeni people. The importance of fundamental rights, including social and economic rights. Thus, the Emirates will continue their support for development in Yemen. It is vital to allow for the distribution of humanitarian assistance without any hindrance. And we call upon the countries of the international community to support the 2022 action for humanitarian assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to China.
Madam Vice President, the primary responsibility for the promotion and protection of human rights lies with the national government, and technical assistance and capacity building in this field can contribute to the advancement of human rights cause at national level. The Council should, therefore, take more concrete actions to step up technical assistance and capacity building with increased input from the OHCHR. China believes that technical assistance and capacity building should be guided by the following principles. First, to abide by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the countries concerned, and avoid using technical assistance and capacity building as a pretext to interfere in other countries' internal affairs and politicize human rights issues. Second, to insist on mutually beneficial cooperation, respect the wishes and the needs of the countries concerned, and on the basis of a thorough consultation with them, provide constructive assistance and support. Third, to treat all types of human rights with a balanced approach. And when working toward a post-COVID recovery and the elimination of inequalities, special attention should be paid to the promotion and protection of economic, social, and cultural rights and the right to development. I thank you, Madam.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Mauritania.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. My delegation commends the efforts of OHCHR in the area of technical assistance and capacity building. We stress that the implementation of technical assistance and capacity building programs should be subject to the consent of the country concerned and based on its needs and priorities, while fully respecting the priorities and specificities of countries and their national legislations and away from politicization or exploitation. Human rights are universal, indivisible, interrelated, and interdependent. Therefore, technical assistance should target all human rights, the civil, political, economic, social, and cultural ones, as well as the right to development on equal footing. Therefore, we encourage donors to consider these dimensions. Madam Vice President, we commend the cooperation between Yemen and OHCHR, and we welcome the progress achieved by the National Investigation Committee and the field visits that happened all over the country and the consultations that were done with the civil society groups. Reporting of violations of human rights have been also improved, which we commend. In this respect, we call all parties to cooperate with the National Investigation Committee so it can fulfill its mandate independently and actively. In conclusion, we call on the international community to continue to support Yemen politically and economically, including also providing technical support and building the capacities of the Yemeni society in the field of human rights in order to restore peace and prosperity to Yemen. Thank you, Madam Vice President. Thank you.
To India.
Madam Vice President, we thank the Secretary General and the High Commissioner for Human Rights for the presentation of their reports. India strongly believes that the primary responsibility for promotion and protection of human rights lies with the states. In order to supplement states' national efforts, the Council should provide greater technical assistance and capacity building in consultation with and with the consent of the concerned states for the improvement of human rights situation on the ground. We are of the view that the sanctity of Agenda Item 10 should be maintained and its politicization should be avoided. The gaps in the progressive realization of human rights should be addressed in a fair and just manner, guided by the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity and non-selectivity, constructive international dialogue and cooperation, and with due respect to principles of non-interference in internal affairs of states and their national sovereignty. Madam Vice President, in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, the importance of technical assistance and capacity building cannot be overemphasized. Adequate resources must be allocated to the UN Voluntary Fund for Technical Cooperation in the field of human rights, enabling it to support the states in strengthening their human rights framework. It is encouraging to note the increase in contributions from states to support the fund in extending technical cooperation in 2021. India has also made its modest annual voluntary contribution of USD 400,000 to the UN voluntary funds for 2022. Development cooperation, especially South-South cooperation, is a pillar for countries. Supporting the global fight against the pandemic in the spirit of solidarity, India has provided COVID-19 related medical and other assistance to over 150 countries. Since January 2021, over 267 million doses of COVID vaccines have been supplied to 99 countries and 2 UN entities in the form of grant, through commercial export or the COVAX facility. We have also strongly advocated for the principle of equity in WHO and WTO. India is committed to contributing to the global promotion and protection of human rights. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the United States of America, Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. And I want to also thank OHCHR for its presentation to the Council yesterday. OHCHR monitoring, reporting, and expertise plays a critical role in building capacity to address today's human rights challenges. The United States appreciates this important work and encourages countries to work collaboratively and transparently with OHCHR to implement technical assistance. We also urge consistent consideration of equity and inclusion, including ensuring the consideration for and participation of vulnerable and minority groups, women and girls in all their diversity, and civil society. The United States appreciates Cambodia's facilitation of the UN Special Rapporteur's August visit. We ask Cambodia to implement the Special Rapporteur's recommended 10-point agenda. We remain concerned about the restrictive political environment and hope to see the release of all those unjustly detained, including Cambodian American citizens Sang Theory, strengthened human rights protections, and the reopening of civic and political space before the 2023 elections. We welcome the cooperation between Georgia and OHCHR. Georgia's road to full EU candidacy status was clearly articulated by the European Commission. We encourage the Georgian government to seize this opportunity to achieve Georgia's stated goal of Euro-Atlantic integration by working closely with partners like OHCHR and diverse Georgian stakeholders, including civil society groups, in a transparent, inclusive, and credible manner to implement the Commission's recommendations. Justice, accountability, and redress for human rights abuses and violations are key to ensuring a durable peace that enjoys broad support among Yemenis, and the reinstating of the truce would put Yemen on the path toward a durable peace. The United States strongly supports OHCHR reporting in Yemen and the commitment of the government in bolstering justice and accountability. We call on all parties to the conflict to facilitate access for the investigation of human rights abuses and violations. Thank you for the discussion on this important work.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Nepal.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Nepal maintains that the protection and promotion of human rights is a global public good. Hence, it's a global responsibility. This responsibility is translated into action through technical cooperation and capacity building. The technical cooperation has helped countries strengthen the capacities of their human rights institutions as well as in the implementation of UPR recommendation. Moreover, the cooperation facilitates the timely achievement of the SDGs and the fulfillment of the global mandate of the High Commissioner. However, such cooperation should be based on genuine consultation and the consent of the concerned countries. Moreover, it should align with the needs and priorities of the countries. Therefore, we encourage states and other donors to increase their contribution to voluntary trust fund. Equally important is to ensure the sustainability and predictability of resources. Madam Vice President, as a beneficiary country, Nepal welcomes the functioning of the LDC SIDS Trust Fund. We believe that the Trust Fund has ensured universal participation and inclusivity in the works of the Council. Further, the Trust Fund has also promoted diversity and voices of the delegates from the eligible countries who have utilized these occasions to express their most important concerns on human rights. Additionally, Nepal believes that technical support is also required to develop the capacity of CSOs, media, and local level officials to promote their constructive engagement. Madam Vice President, Nepal is committed to strengthening the national human rights mechanisms and institutions. The cooperation of the OHCHR and the international community is crucial to complement our national efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Indonesia views the enhancement of technical cooperation and capacity building is an essential component in supporting states' national capacities in the promotion and protection of human rights, and it is one of the cornerstone mandates of the Human Rights Council. My delegation believes that Agenda Item 10 should serve as a platform for states to have genuine and constructive discussion on their need in exercising their human rights responsibilities and to deliberate on the advantage and challenges of technical cooperation and capacity building in the area of human rights. The attempt to use Agenda Item 10 to instead discuss country-specific situations should not derail the exercise of this agenda item. Resolution 60/251 establishing the Council underscores that the promotion and protection of human rights should be based on the principles of cooperation and genuine dialogue and aim at strengthening this capacity of member states to comply with their human rights obligations and commitments. Therefore, the work of the SRC and of NOHCHR should always be guided by the already agreed principles. Madam Vice President, this year's resolution on the enhancement of technical cooperation and capacity building in the field of human rights, where Indonesia is honored to be part of the core group, does not choose a specific theme for technical cooperation as we usually do in the previous iteration of the resolution. Instead, the resolution is formulated to provide opportunity for the Council, states, and other stakeholders, including civil society, to reflect from experiences both in receiving and providing technical cooperation and capacity building in the areas of human rights, with the objective to strengthen this important tool of human rights cooperation. Madam Vice President, we believe that the technical cooperation and capacity building provided with consultation and with the consent of the state concerned based on mutual trust will be able to result in a long-term and meaningful improvement for states in addressing challenges, improving human rights situation on the ground, and preventing violation. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Technical cooperation plays a vital role in the promotion and protection of human rights. I would like to welcome those states that have engaged with the Council and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We encourage all states to fully cooperate with the UN to meet their human rights obligations. We welcome the continued collaboration between Georgia and OHCHR. but remain deeply concerned by the human rights situation in the Georgian regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, including enhanced restrictions on freedom of movement and ongoing ethnic discrimination. We condemn the decision to replace Georgian language teaching with Russian in schools of the ethnic Georgian inhabited Gali district. We deplore the repeated, unjustified and counterproductive refusal of those in control of Abkhazia and South Ossetia to enable unimpeded access to the OHCHR and UN mechanisms. The human rights situation in Yemen remains deeply concerning. We call on all parties of the conflict to carry out full investigations to bring to justice the perpetrators of crimes involving abuses against human rights and violations of international humanitarian law. We encourage Yemen to continue to engage with the Office of the High Commissioner and the Council to ensure accountability and lasting peace. The UK is concerned at the worrying rate of murders of and threats against human rights defenders, social leaders and former FARC EP combatants in Colombia. We welcome Colombia's ongoing coordination with the UN and the positive steps taken towards implementing an emergency protection plan to ensuring security for affected communities. We commend President Petro's commitment to comprehensive implementation of the peace agreement with the FARC and to addressing other security and social challenges. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Pakistan acknowledges the significant role played by the Human Rights Council in the technical assistance mandate. We have been a steadfast contributor to OHCHR and the various voluntary funds in different thematic areas, including UPR, victims of torture, and so forth. We believe that the Council has a substantial role in assisting states in protecting and furthering human rights and development of their people by providing them with tailored help in specific areas in their pursuit of implementing international obligations and furthering national priorities. Henceforth, we reiterate our strong support, both political and financial, for full and effective mandate of the Human Rights Council. Pakistan strongly believes that the technical cooperation mandate should not be used as a political tool, and we discourage any such attempts which may create a doubt on the credibility of this eminent body. Madam Vice President, we have taken note of the High Commissioner's report regarding technical assistance to Yemen. Pakistan supports dialogue and engagement as useful tools to advance the global human rights agenda. This applies to the situation in Yemen as well. We highlight the need for the renewal of truce and call upon all parties to the conflict in Yemen to engage in a meaningful dialogue to end hostilities and ensure regional peace and stability. We fully support the initiatives by the GCC and the Saudi efforts for peaceful settlement of the conflict in Yemen. Madam Vice President, Pakistan believes that if the principles encapsulated in UNGA Resolution 60/251 are implemented in true spirit and in an impartial manner, the technical assistance program can prove to be a highly significant vehicle for a more profound international cooperation and dialogue at the Council, which will be extremely meaningful to help developing states to overcome the challenges they face to further human rights and development agenda. We call upon the global community to help the developing states in grappling with economic, social, health and development challenges, especially in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, global financial crunch and climate catastrophe. Madam Vice President, we call on the Council and wider UN human rights bodies to continue their invaluable assistance to the developing states, especially in the backdrop of COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Benin.
Merci, Madame la Vice-Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The delegation of Benin supports the statement by the African Group, which quite rightly stresses the importance of technical cooperation and capacity building as part of the process of universalizing protection and promotion of human rights. The encouraging results that have come out in a number of beneficiary countries bear out the idea that technical cooperation is a vital supporting measure to ensure better appropriation and ownership of human rights international treaties and standards in the areas where, or the countries where it is necessary. It's a question of equity which requires continuing close attention in the work of the Council. to strengthen the credibility of its mechanisms and procedures so that the best intentions in the area of human rights are not impeded in their implementation by structural and capacity flaws, which are clear in certain countries. In this respect, Benin would like to express its appreciation for the regular assistance it has benefited from under the Special Trust Fund for the participation of LDCs and SIDS in the work of the Council, as well as the technical support provided by the treaty bodies, as well as the drafting of its national reports and the evaluation of the impact of its work in the area of human rights. Indeed, in recent years, Benin has made tangible progress, as is shown by, first, the improvement in and strengthening of the legal and institutional framework for human rights, inter alia, by constitutional reforms and legislative reforms giving prominence to women's rights. Second, the creation and operationalization of the Human Rights Commission of Benin, which was given A accreditation this year by the World Alliance of national human rights institutions. And third, the development and submission of national reports under the various legal international instruments that it has ratified. In light of the above, my country will support, as part of this session, all of the draft resolutions aiming at consolidating the Council's activities and the activities of OHCHR in the area of technical cooperation and capacity building. Lastly, my delegation would like to reaffirm its wish that the LDCs and SIDS meeting in the Council can benefit from priority attention in the framework of the assistance of the Special Trust Fund so as to ensure that their mandate is properly carried out. Thank you.
Ambassador.
Ukraine thanks the Office of the High Commissioner and its team for their work in assisting states to strengthen human rights protection at national, regional and global levels. Ukraine appreciates the activities of the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, which was deployed at the request of the government of Ukraine in 2014 to provide monitoring of the human rights situation with a special focus on parts of Donbas and Crimea, which were already occupied by Russia at that time. Today we consider crucial to continue strong and independent human rights presence in the situation of Russia's full-scale invasion and its war of aggression against Ukraine, which caused a dramatic and rapid deterioration of the human rights situation, accompanied by massive human rights abuses, war crimes and crimes against humanity. Unfortunately, due to Russia's restriction, the mission is not able to conduct its monitoring in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Those territories have become the areas of lawlessness and fear, reprisals and persecutions, intimidation and arbitrary arrests, torture, killings and enforced disappearances, denial of the right to peaceful assembly, freedom of speech and freedom of consciousness, infringement on religious rights, property rights and right to education in native language, destruction of cultural monuments, forced military conscription, forcible transfer and deportation of populations. We look forward to the mission's continued regular, objective and credible monitoring of the situation in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, which could contribute to preventing further human rights abuses and bringing those responsible to justice. Madam Vice Chair, the pattern of Russia's gross and systematic violations of human rights and its non-cooperation with human rights monitoring mechanisms extends well beyond Ukraine. In this regard, we thank the UNHCR for its update on cooperation with Georgia, which, echoing previous reports on the subject, pays specific attention to the lack of access to Abkhazia and South Ossetia to deliver assistance and address continuing human rights violation of population living there. Ukraine reaffirms its support for Georgia's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. We call on partners and UN human rights mechanisms to join us in urging Russia to return to compliance with its obligations under international law and stop its aggression and occupation of sovereign states and their people. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Poland. Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Poland aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. We thank for the update on cooperation with Georgia. We also welcome technical assistance constantly provided by the OHCHR to Georgia. Poland is extremely concerned about the human rights and humanitarian situation in the Georgian breakaway territories of Abkhazia and South Ossetia Tsingali region. We deplore the persistent lack of access by OHCHR and other international monitoring mechanisms to these areas. Poland is deeply concerned about the continued process of the so-called borderization that negatively impacts social and economic conditions of the local population and strongly affects enjoyment of their rights. It has particularly accelerated in South Ossetia-Tringali region during the last reporting period. Moreover, Poland reiterates its concerns about continued restriction on the use of Georgian as a language of instruction in both breakaway regions, resulting in discrimination of Georgian-speaking inhabitants and leading to their lower learning achievements. We call on those in control of the breakaway regions to stop discrimination of the Georgian population and to grant full and unhindered access to these areas by international organizations. Such access is essential to properly assess the humanitarian and human rights situation on the spot. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Qatar.
Madam Vice President, technical assistance and capacity building is a part and parcel of the mandate of the Human Rights Council and the OHCHR to help states to fulfill their obligations in the field of human rights. In view of the growing challenges facing all countries of the world today, including the negative consequences of climate change, rampant poverty, food insecurity, and the prolongation and expansion of armed conflicts, in addition to health challenges such as COVID-19. As such, technical assistance and helping out states to build their capacities in the field of human rights upon their desire, priorities, and needs is indispensable to address these challenges. This support is not only important to promote and protect human rights, but also to realize sustainable development goals and support the efforts of states in this respect. We affirm that all human rights, including the right to development, are interdependent, interrelated, and mutually reinforcing, and therefore they need to be tackled on equal basis and accorded the same amount of priority and attention. In this respect, we wish to affirm that strengthening constructive international cooperation, including exchange of good practices, transfer of knowledge, leveraging technological and scientific progress, and helping states bridge the digital gap is a main pillar to providing assistance and technical support. It is also a prerequisite to realize the universality of human rights. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Malaysia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Malaysia aligns itself with the statements of ASEAN and NAM. Malaysia closely follows the reports, presentations, as well as insights in this council regarding technical cooperation and capacity building. We echo views that technical cooperation should be tailored to the country's needs and priorities, and based on consultations with and the consent of the states concerned, with a view to bringing tangible outcome on the ground. We therefore reiterate our call for the Council to continue its efforts to materialize the spirit and intention of Agenda Item 10. We believe that discussion under Agenda Item 10 provides a platform for constructive dialogue to support national efforts in the implementation of states' human rights obligations. Such assistance is essential to create an enabling environment in which states could realize their aspirations for peace, stability, and development in this challenging post-pandemic recovery period. Similarly, we appreciate the efforts put forth by Cambodia and the Philippines to address challenges relating to their human rights situation. Malaysia calls on the international community to continue supporting Cambodia and the Philippines' human rights endeavors. Here, we underline the importance for the OHCHR to continue providing technical cooperation and capacity building for states to better align and implement their human rights agenda with the international human rights standards while leaving no one behind. Towards this end, Malaysia reaffirms our commitment to working closely with the OHCHR and its mechanisms to increase awareness and strengthen the country's efforts in advancing human rights, particularly through practical cooperation, capacity building, and technical assistance. I thank you.
Thank you. And we shall now proceed with the list of speakers of observer states of the Council. And I have the honor to give the floor to the distinguished representative of the International Development Law Organization.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Through decades of work in over 90 countries, IDLO has found that peace and development are best advanced by supporting the rule of law. A strong rule of law system protects human rights through effective institutions, equality before the law, compliance with international norms and standards, as well as legal empowerment. It places people at the center of justice and governance. IDLO achieves these objectives by working top-down with governments and bottom-up with civil society. We integrate our assistance to strengthen legal frameworks, improve access for the vulnerable, especially women and girls, and support development outcomes. This focus on the rule of law offers significant benefits for advancing the full range of human rights, civil and political and economic and social. For example, our work in the Sahel led to the development of consultative mechanisms that have allowed communities and justice providers to jointly rectify shortcomings in justice delivery. Our anti-corruption work in countries ranging from Armenia to the Bahamas, Moldova to Mongolia and beyond has contributed to advancing transparency, integrity and accountability of the justice sector. We have provided technical assistance to support least developed countries with investment dispute resolution and contract negotiations with multinational corporations, advancing sustainable economic development. We encourage this Council to integrate the rule of law and access to justice as tools to support countries' efforts to improve human rights. IDLO stands ready to partner with you to achieve those goals. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines on behalf of a group of countries.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I have the honor to deliver this joint statement on behalf of the 13 beneficiary delegates of the LDC Sage Trust Fund. Our respective states remain committed to ensure that the promotion and protection of human rights issues take precedence in the discourse of all global forums. We emphasize the importance of the continuation of the technical assistance and capacity building initiatives, in particular the LDC Sage Trust Fund program, which enabled our participation in the work of the Council. The program not only provided us with ample opportunities to engage, discuss, and highlight various dimensions of human rights issues affecting our states, but also provided us opportunities to learn from other states' best practices. We take this opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to the Trust Fund Secretariat for continuous support extended to us. During the 51st session, we were able to be actively engaged in the work of the Council, deliver statements, participate in informal consultation, and most importantly, raise the voices and visibility of our states in the Council. Through the support of the Trust Fund Secretariat, as well as other supporting agencies, the delegates who do not have a permanent mission in Geneva were provided with adequate working space and technical assistance to participate in the session actively. Madam Vice President, we welcome the 10th anniversary of the LDC Sage Trust Fund. In accordance with the HRC Resolution 3440 and in the spirit of Leave No One Behind, we encourage all states, particularly developed countries, to support the Trust Fund to actively work towards ensuring inclusivity and universality in the work of the Council and to contribute in raising the voice and visibility of LDCs and SID states. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Samoa.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We extend our appreciation to the LDC SIDS Trust Fund, which enabled our country's participation at the Council prior to the establishment of our permanent mission in May. Samoa strongly values the investment in our people to ensure that we can effectively implement our human rights obligations and remain on track in achieving the SDG 30 agenda. SDG 17 is an integral part in the capacity building of our government officials and civil society. Data collection is a commonly faced problem in Samoa that impacts our reporting obligations. We endeavor to overcome these challenges through technical assistance and expertise provided by the support from relevant partners, as well as the utilization of our human rights recommendations tracking to SIDATA. We greatly value the continuous support from OHCHR and the Pacific community and all key donor partners in this regard. Madam Vice President, we stand in solidarity with the Republic of Marshall Islands as they seek technical assistance and capacity building from the OHCHR to address the human rights implications of their nuclear legacy. As stated by the Special Rapporteur in his 2012 report, nuclear testing resulted in both immediate and continuing effects on the human rights of the Marshallese.
We implore the Council and the OHCHR to provide the technical assistance needed when it is requested by the state in order for them to fully realize the enjoyment of their human rights obligations. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Bahrain.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. My delegation has taken due note of the reports provided on technical assistance and capacity building in the field of human rights. In this respect, we wish to reaffirm our continued support to the mechanism of technical assistance capacity building as one of the most important tools to improve the human rights situation in the countries concerned. This tool provides vital opportunities through genuine dialogue and cooperation between the OHCHR and the HRC and the countries concerned. Madam Vice President, we value the capacity building and technical assistance activities provided by the OHCHR to the Yemeni National Commission of Inquiry to help the legitimate government of Yemen to investigate the atrocities and human rights violations perpetrated in Yemen. We call upon all the countries concerned to fully cooperate with the Yemeni Commission of Inquiry, being the most effective and most able mechanism to monitor and investigate into the human rights violations on the ground. In conclusion, Madam Vice President, we look forward to constructive cooperation with the OHCHR, particularly when it comes to technical assistance capacity building programs, as my country has recently launched its National Plan for Human Rights 2020-2025, and it is important to exchange practices in this respect. Thank you.
Remind everybody to respect the speaking time, because this will enable all of us a lunch break. And of course, it's also a matter of equity. I now have the honor to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Madame la Vice-Présidente.
Vice President, Switzerland thanks the Acting High Commissioner for her report on technical assistance provided to the National Commission of Inquiry in Yemen. Switzerland's worried about the fact that the ceasefire in Yemen hasn't yet been renewed. We call upon all parties to make efforts under the auspices of the UN to achieve a lasting agreement, which is a crucial stage in alleviating the suffering of civilians and facilitating humanitarian access to people in need. In view of the many international humanitarian law and human rights violations which have been committed since the start of the conflict, the lack of progress and accountability is very worrying. Fighting impunity is a prerequisite for national reconciliation and lasting peace. Thus, Switzerland calls for a new international fact-finding mechanisms to investigate on human rights violations and international humanitarian law violations to be re-established. It's also vital the international community continues to monitor the human rights situation in Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Madam Vice President, Russia is guided by the belief that issues of technical and advisory assistance and capacity building for states should remain at the heart of the UN's work in the area of human rights. This applies both to intergovernmental bodies, including the HRC, and also expert and secretariat bodies. A special role is to be played by the OHCHR, which should provide states with technical assistance at their request. However, the potential of the HRC and the OHCHR has not been fully tapped. Requests from developing countries for assistance go unanswered for years, whereas this aid is imposed on others, sometimes forcibly, with threats and blackmail being resorted to. We have consistently spoken out against the politicization of the provision of technical assistance, which should be supplied only at the request of interested states without any conditions. We think it is intolerable for a certain group of countries to attempt to use this assistance for interfering in internal affairs, and that includes with a view to adjusting national policies in the human rights sphere. The worldwide economic recession, increased unemployment, worsened social vulnerability, and uneven levels of development between states and regions, that is what affects all of us without exception. It is on these problems that we must now focus. We must look for ways of resolving these issues together and drawing upon the potential of technical assistance in the area of human rights in so doing. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Afghanistan.
Madam Vice President, we thank the representatives of the Secretary General and High Commissioner for the reports presented under this agenda item yesterday. The relevance of technical assistance and capacity building for Afghanistan is beyond any doubt. Direct and on-the-ground engagement and support to the people of Afghanistan are pivotal in order to avoid further deterioration of the situation and to keep the struggle for better conditions going. In particular, it's important to assess both technically and financially the Afghan civil society organizations and the media on the ground and those in exile in their struggle to monitor and report on the human rights abuses and crimes committed by the Taliban. Madam Vice President, we urge the office to enhance the capacities of the UNAMA Human Rights Unit in Afghanistan to sharpen their oversight, including on places of detention, strengthen documentation and data collection, expand their reach throughout the country, and facilitate victims safe access to the HRC special procedures, treaty bodies, and other international accountability mechanisms. We also request the OHCHR to continue to provide technical assistance to the permanent missions of Afghanistan to fill the monitoring and advocacy void left by the dissolution of the national human rights institutions and mechanisms. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Jordan.
Thank you, Vice President. My country's delegation insists on the need to pursue efforts to bring an end to the Yemeni crisis. Notably, this should be based on the Inclusive National Dialogue Security Council Resolution 2216 and the efforts of the Gulf Cooperation Council. This will help us restore peace and stability, territorial integrity, and a return to national sovereignty in the country and bring an end to the suffering of civilians and help us meet their aspirations. We fully support the Secretary General's envoy to Yemen and the UN mission, which is based in Amman. We call upon the international community to continue to support the National Commission of Inquiry in Yemen so that it can also support the government. There are huge challenges which the government needs to overcome despite the very complex circumstances. Technical assistance must continue to be granted under Item 10 in order to build the government's capacity and that of other Yemeni authorities so that they can fully discharge their mandates and respond to the population's ambitions. This must be based on dialogue, non-politicization, and the absence of double standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Mauritius associates itself with the statement delivered by Côte d'Ivoire on behalf of the African Group and the statement delivered by St. Vincent and the Grenadines on behalf of the beneficiaries of the LDC Seeds Trust Fund. Mauritius believes that multilateralism is key for the promotion and protection of human rights. Multilateralism, is strengthened through training and capacity building, which enables dialogue between member states and the Council. Mauritius reiterates that inclusivity, diversity, and universal participation in the work of the Council are key to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. As such, Mauritius, as one of the pen holders of the resolution which called for the establishment of the LDC Seeds Trust Fund, expresses appreciation to the donors for their trust in a fund which attempts to have universal participation in the work of the Council. Madam Vice President, on the 15th anniversary of the Voluntary Fund for Financial and Technical Assistance in the implementation of the Universal Periodic Review, Mauritius expresses its appreciation to the donors, which allows for the timely participation of LDCs and SIDS in the UPR process. To conclude, We believe that with technical assistance and capacity building, other states may best work when solutions are tailor-made to suit the needs and specificities of countries. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The provision of technical support and capacity building is one of the main ways stipulated by the Human Rights Council to advance the civil, political, cultural, economic and social rights, including the right to development in a context of paying respect to human rights based on international cooperation in line with the UN Charter. We recall that the purpose of Item 10 is the provision of technical support and capacity building. This support and cooperation, though, has to be based on the request of the country concerned and in line with its needs. It should be dissociated from any political agendas under the guise of provision of technical support, because some countries do this practice in order to advance their own purposes. We must refrain from turning technical assistance as a way to impose anything on countries or slander them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Norway.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Norway reaffirms its strong support for technical assistance and capacity building as one of the essential tools to assist states in implementing their human rights obligations. The OHCHR and other stakeholders play a vital role in this regard. As members of two core groups promoting technical assistance and capacity building this session, Norway seeks to strengthen these efforts in the field of human rights. We believe that the Council also has the potential to improve its efforts. We therefore welcome the half-day intersessional meeting in draft resolution 51L15 to take stock of and further elaborate on this important issue. We would encourage all states to engage in such a dialogue. Furthermore, this year marks the 15th anniversary of the Universal Periodic Review Voluntary Fund. As its largest donors, Norway will encourage more states to step forward as donors and existing donors to increase their contributions to enable the fund to assist even more countries. Capacity building is a key element of the long-term efforts to prevent human rights violations and abuses and build national resilience. We will therefore continue to support technical assistance and capacity building efforts that would lead to the improvement on the ground. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Lithuania Ambassador.
Madam Vice President, Estonia aligns with the EU statement. Estonia remains deeply concerned that in parallel with the Russian unprovoked and unlawful aggression against Ukraine and the attempted annexation of the occupied territories, the human rights situation in the regions of Georgia, in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, occupied by Russia 15 years ago, proceeds to deteriorate. Allegations of torture and other forms of ill treatment, illegal detentions and deprivation of liberty continue to mount up, whilst ethnic discrimination, particularly against Georgians, persist. Continued restrictions on the use of Georgian as a language at schools and kindergartens annually deprive some 5,000 children in Abkhazia and South Ossetia of the right to receive education in their mother tongue. Additionally, the information and recruitment of people from the occupied regions of Georgia to send them to fight in Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine is extremely distressing and in violation of international law. We reiterate our call to Russian Federation and the other de facto authorities to allow unimpeded access for international and regional human rights organizations and mechanisms to Abkhazia and South Ossetia. It is a matter of serious concern that no one has been held accountable for the tortures and deaths that have occurred. Lack of accountability contributes to a climate of impunity, which leads to further crimes. The human rights violations in the occupied regions of Georgia must come to an end, bringing all the perpetrators to justice. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Burkina Faso.
Madam la Vice-Presidente.
Vice President, Burkina Faso thanks the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for its efforts to promote and protect human rights around the world, thanks to the programme of technical assistance and capacity building providing to states who request it. This programme is vital for improving the human rights situation in recipient countries. It should be developed through a constructive approach which takes stock of the needs of the country in question. We are pleased with the relationship that we have with the office, thanks to our country office, which opened last year. Human rights are universal, independent, and indivisible. It's up to all of us, individually and collectively, to ensure that human rights are enjoyed by all. This is the 15th anniversary of the Voluntary Fund for Technical Cooperation in implementing recommendations for the UPR. At this juncture, we call for the fund to be increased so that all countries who request support may be catered to, so they can better implement the UPR recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We align ourselves with the statement delivered by the African Group. South Sudan reiterates its fully commitment to the implementation of the peace agreement, support the rule of law, and guarantee the protection and promotion of the human rights in the country. We firmly reject the mandate of the Commission of Human Rights in South Sudan and the mix and match of two agendas. Moreover, we call upon the Human Rights Council to remember that the technical assistance and capacity building is in the item 10, is not in the item 2 or item 4. My government consider item 10 for technical assistance and capacity building as the only agenda that can help the rule of law institution and enhance the implementation of the peace agreement in the country. We call on the Office of the Special Representative of the United Nations in South Sudan to have constructive cooperation with the government of South Sudan in providing technical assistance and capacity building in the country. South Sudan urged the Office of the Higher Commissioner to implement the resolutions 49/35 for technical assistance and capacity building for South Sudan, and it will be much more meaningful and impact measure technical assistance and capacity building if the Office of the Higher Commission set up the mechanism to implement this resolution. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Moldova Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We welcome the update on cooperation with Georgia, and we welcome the Georgian government's commitment to promote and protect human rights for all. We commend the engagement of the Georgian government with the OHCHR, and we welcome the launch of the Interagency Coordination Committee for the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We encourage the Georgian government to finalize and adopt the National Human Rights Plan for the period 2022-2030 in a transparent and participatory manner, and to take further steps to strengthen the functioning of democratic institutions, protection of human rights and rule of law. We would like to reiterate our concern regarding human rights abuses in the Georgian regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, in particular with regards to restrictions of the rights to education, property, security and healthcare. Limitations with respect to the use of Georgian language in the Abkhazia and South Ossetia regions affecting ethnic Georgians are unacceptable. Additionally, we are deeply concerned by restrictions on freedom of movement which have negative implications on the enjoyment of property rights in those regions, but also on family life. We urge the authorities in control to ensure access to quality education for all without discrimination, including in one's mother's tongue, and to immediately lift all restrictions on the freedom of movement, freedom of expression and speech, as well as peaceful assembly. Republic of Moldova calls for immediate and unfettered access for the Office of the High Commissioner and international human rights mechanisms to the Abkhazia and South Ossetia regions of Georgia. Finally, Republic of Moldova fully supports the sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of Georgia within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Bulgaria. Ambassador.
Madam Vice President, Bulgaria aligns with the EU statement. We commend the OHCHR for its continuing fruitful cooperation with the government of Georgia and welcome the Georgian government's strong commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights. We would like to highlight the recent positive developments and particularly the progress in the preparation of the human rights strategy of Georgia for the period 2022-2030. Bulgaria also acknowledges the launch of the Interagency Coordination Committee for the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We remain concerned about the negative consequences of the policies pursued by the de facto authorities in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. We are alarmed by the reported lack of improvement in ensuring respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and particularly by continued discrimination on ethnic grounds, restrictions on the freedom of movement, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, ill treatment in places of detention. We call for the elimination of ethnic discrimination, for removal of restrictions on freedom of movement, and for ensuring the effective and meaningful participation of women in conflict prevention and resolution in these two regions. Bulgaria reiterates its unwavering support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia within its internationally recognized borders. We renew our call for immediate and unimpeded access for the OHCHR and international and regional human rights organizations and mechanisms to the occupied Georgian regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I now give the floor to Algeria.
شكرا سيدة نائبة الرئيس.
Thank you, Vice President. Algeria insists on the importance of technical assistance and capacity building in the field of human rights. We're very pleased with the work undertaken by the Office and the Council in this area. These programs are more vital than ever because they help contribute to peace, security and development. We must design technical assistance and capacity building programs in line with the consent and the circumstances of each country. The international community should provide more resources to support human rights in those states which request such programs, and notably for implementing recommendations. Very often the implementation of recommendations doesn't depend only on political will but also on the resources available. Assets stolen from some countries undermine their ability to promote and protect human rights. Thus, it's absolutely vital and urgent that we explore new avenues of strengthening technical assistance and capacity building programs so that we find solutions to pressing issues. Similarly, those countries under occupation need resolutions from the Istanbul Summit of 2016 to be implemented, as well as paragraph 9 of Resolution 95/74. Thailand has the floor.
Itself with the ASEAN statement made under this agenda item. As the penholder of a core group on technical cooperation resolution, we are determined to advance this issue so that agenda item 10 remains relevant and meaningful. We have observed the increasing trend of country-specific resolutions under this agenda item. Effective technical cooperation and capacity building would facilitate greater collaboration and coordination, as well as cultivate mutual trust and understanding between the relevant stakeholders in addressing a broader range of issues under these resolutions. In other words, the resolution of these kinds would be better implemented with tangible results on the ground. Thailand appreciates the constructive engagement by all during the negotiation of this year's technical cooperation resolution. We stand ready to work closely with colleagues and partners to further advance cooperation and strengthen capacity on the promotion and protection of human rights. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Uganda.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Uganda aligns with the African Group statement.
We also thank the Office of the High Commissioner for the continued effort in amplifying the importance of technical assistance and capacity building to foster national resilience in promotion and protection of human rights. As a previous beneficiary of the LDC Trust Fund, we wish to confirm the important contribution it has in the attainment of universal participation in the work of Human Rights Council, as well as capacity building. We appreciate the donor states that continue to fund and urge the others to contribute to the fund to carry forward this very important work. Madam Vice President, my government further believes that technical assistance in the field of human rights should focus on capacity building of national processes and mechanisms devoid of politicization, and it should go beyond civil and political rights to include focus on economic and social rights, especially the right to development. Madam Vice President, Uganda would like to reiterate and reaffirm our invaluable respect for human rights and pledge to continue to work with the Office of the High Commissioner, including through her country office in Kampala, to ensure the promotion and protection of our people's human rights. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Sweden.
Vice President, Sweden aligns itself with the European Union. Sweden highly appreciates OHCHR's invaluable work in promoting respect and protection of human rights around the world. To ensure its capacity, adequate and consistent funding must be secured. Sweden urges Cambodia to open up civil and political space and end its persecution of political opponents and human rights defenders. We reiterate the need to ensure political participation, freedom of expression, opinion, association and assembly. Sweden supports the National Commission of Inquiry in Yemen and regrets the non-renewal of the mandate of the GEE. We welcome OHCHR's assistance to the National Commission and call on all parties to implement its recommendations. We urge the parties to engage with the UN Special Envoy to renew the truce. We reaffirm our full support for Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. While commending Georgia's efforts, we encourage further reforms, including for an independent judiciary, against gender-based discrimination and violence, and for the protection of persons belonging to vulnerable groups. We call for immediate and unimpeded access for OHCHR to Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Sweden supports Colombia's peace efforts and welcomes the government's priorities to implement the peace agreement and improve the security situation of human rights defenders. The OHCHR is a key actor and partner to achieve a lasting peace. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Georgia Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Georgia acknowledges the vital role of the Office of the High Commissioner for the promotion and protection of human rights across the globe. As we face the rising number of human rights violations in different parts of the world, technical assistance and capacity building provided by the Council with the aid of the OHCHR can significantly contribute to strengthening national frameworks for the advancement of human rights. 3 days ago, this Council had an oral update by the High Commissioner on Ukraine, where Russia's ongoing aggression continues to cause unspeakable human rights violations and abuses, some of which amount to war crimes. Recently, we have witnessed yet another attempt by the Russian Federation to redraw the borders of sovereign state. Georgia condemns in the strongest possible terms an attempt of illegal annexation of Ukrainian regions following the Sham referendum. Georgia has been the first to face Russia's aggressive policy since the early 1990s, which continued with the full-scale military aggression in 2008 and attempts to forcibly change the borders of a sovereign state in Europe, to occupy the indivisible regions of Georgia and take steps toward their de facto annexation, to expel hundreds of thousands of people from their homes as a result of ethnic cleansing, and to divide societies with occupation lines. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate our call on the Russian Federation to grant full, unimpeded and immediate access of international human rights monitoring mechanisms to the occupied territories of Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Hungary.
Thank you. We would like to emphasize our appreciation for having item 10 on the Council's agenda, as it's a vital forum which opens doors for states to share their views on how to enhance the efficiency of technical cooperation and capacity building in the field of human rights. Constructive engagement by concerned states reflected in positive developments on the ground justifies that frank dialogue and close cooperation are the best way forward in addressing human rights concerns. Also, there is no doubt that this process should take into consideration both the social and cultural realities and reflect national objectives. While countries like Sri Lanka, Cambodia, or the Philippines are facing different challenges, acknowledgement of progress made and appreciating their openness to cooperate with the special procedures can pave the way for further positive developments on the ground. We do believe that an objective, fair, and balanced assessment of the human rights situations of states is essential. Hungary welcomes the Philippines' endeavors to further strengthen domestic human rights and accountability mechanisms. Likewise, Cambodia's sustained efforts in constructively engaging with human rights mechanisms of the UN. While challenges remain, the best way forward is to continue the constructive dialogue, including under Item 10. We firmly believe that such an approach can effectively contribute to promoting the advancement of human rights for all. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Latvia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Latvia aligns with the EU statement. We underline the importance of the work of the OHCHR and welcome the support provided to the government of Georgia to further improve the promotion and protection of human rights in the country. Latvia remains deeply alarmed by persisting human rights violations in the Georgian regions of Abkhazia and Sinhala, South Ossetia, currently being outside of the effective control of the Georgian government and experiencing the continuing Russian illegal military presence. We reiterate our call on the de facto authorities exercising effective control of these regions to grant immediate, unconditional and unimpeded access to all relevant human rights mechanisms. Latvia does not recognize either the so-called parliamentary elections in Abkhazia in March this year or the so-called presidential elections in South Ossetia in April this year. Latvia also strongly condemns the recent visit of Alexander Lukashenko to Abkhazia. All these activities were carried out without the consent of the government of Georgia, and they violate Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity and constitute a blatant violation of international law. Once again, I would like to express the unwavering support of the government of Latvia to sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia within its internationally recognized borders. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Suriname.
Madam Vice President, Suriname underscores the relevance and importance of technical cooperation to step up efforts for the promotion and protection of human rights. Suriname reaffirms its commitment to continue working constructively with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights towards advancing the implementation of treaty obligations as well as universal periodic review commitments, including through the respective UPR Trust Fund. In this context, we emphasize the importance of involving the train-the-trainers aspect in all capacity-building initiatives for both governmental and non-governmental organizations and to engage with relevant local experts. Additionally, we express appreciation for the contributions of donor countries to the Voluntary Technical Assistance Trust Fund to support the participation of least development countries and small island development states in the work of the Council. Being a beneficiary of the fund has contributed to expressing our views within the Council, networking, and further strengthening of national capacities. In closing, Madam President, Suriname remains committed to its human rights obligations, including through continued cooperation with the local United Nations office, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and other partners. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Papua New Guinea.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. At the outset, let me thank the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for the various support provided to the government of Papua New Guinea, and I welcome the reports provided by your office. Madam Vice President, since the establishment of the UN Human Rights Advisors Unit in Papua New Guinea, we have received various technical assistance, advice, and capacity building support to strengthen our domestic efforts to fulfill the government's international human rights obligations. With this support as well, Papua New Guinea was able to present its third cycle of the UPR in November 2021. The recent proposal made through the Pacific Community to establish a National Human Rights Commission in Papua New Guinea is welcome and will be a significant milestone for us. Madam Vice President, as part of the beneficiary of the LDCs and Seeds Trust Fund Delegate Program, I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to the Secretariat to see the need for such technical assistance and capacity building support, especially for Seeds and LDCs, to participate fully in the Council. In conclusion, let me assure you that Papua New Guinea remains committed to working with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, stakeholders and development partners in addressing all forms of human rights issues and to work together to build back better and leave no one behind. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Tunisia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Tunis stresses the important role of technical cooperation and capacity building in the field of the promotion of human rights. We reiterate our firm commitment to continuing cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner. We express our heartfelt appreciation for the efforts by the Office of the High Commissioner in supporting the systems of national human rights, as well as through the technical cooperation and its cooperation with civil society organizations. We would like to thank the Office of the High Commissioner and the Danish Institute for Human Rights and UNICEF for the support that they provided for Tunisia to prepare its national report in the fourth cycle of UPR that Tunis will discuss next month. This report will highlight the important strides by the new Tunisia in the promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms and its cooperation with all human rights mechanisms. Tunisia stresses that the Human Rights Council and the treaty bodies represent a vital space for the promotion of the efforts and the cooperation with the international community with a view to achieving our noble objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Iran.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The promotion and protection of human rights in the Council should be based on the principles of cooperation and genuine dialogue, as enshrined in Resolution 16/251, and be aimed at strengthening the capacity of states to fulfill their human rights obligation. The capacity building and technical assistance is added value venue to strengthen cooperation and dialogue among states and the OHCHR, and to provide the member states upon their request and with their consent consultation they need with a view to address their challenges, aiming to promote and protect all human rights. The technical assistance and capacity building in the field of human rights and the mechanism of the UPR are reinforcing, and their centrality for strengthening cooperation and dialogue should be maintained. The UN human rights machinery needs those two important aspects in the field of human rights more than ever. Item 10 of the agenda of the Council is important venue for highlighting the spirit of dialogue and cooperation in the Council. Therefore, this item should be safeguarded from any confrontational and politicized approaches. Technical cooperation and capacity building should be strengthened in the work of the Council. In this context, equal focus should be paid on civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Tanzania.
The United Republic of Tanzania welcomes the report of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on technical assistance and capacity building. We also align with the statement delivered on behalf of the African Group and with the statement delivered by the least developed countries and the small island developing states who benefited the trust fund at this 51st session of Human Rights Council. Madam President, Madam Vice President, we believe that the LDC/SIDS Trust Fund is contributing towards ensuring inclusiveness and exchange of best practices of human rights initiatives for the best interests of the entire global community and for the smooth running of the work of the Council. The United Republic of Tanzania extends its gratitude to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Trust Fund Secretariat for supporting our participation in the session, and encourage all states to contribute to the Trust Fund so that more countries can benefit thereof. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Egypt.
Thank you, Madam President. We attach great importance to technical national capacity building, since this is a crucial tool for delivering on human rights commitments. It's also vital to provide technical cooperation with the consent of the state concerned and according to its own needs. We reject this Council adopting any mechanisms, technical cooperation mechanisms, without the assent of the country concerned. Any cooperation must be based on national dialogue and on genuine cooperation. We appreciate the efforts of the legitimate government of Yemen for implementing investigations and the accountability that it seeks to guarantee. We also applaud efforts and results achieved by the National Commission for Human Rights. The reports of that commission are increasingly important and significant. We call on OHCHR to pursue its efforts to provide technical cooperation to that country. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Saudi Arabia, Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam President. We want to thank the High Commissioner for the report presented on technical cooperation to Yemen. We welcome the efforts of the Yemeni National Commission. We urge OHCHR to continue providing its support to the Commission. The work of this Commission is objective today. Remarkable progress has been achieved. My country stands side by side with Yemen with a view to prolonging the humanitarian truce in Yemen. However, the Houthi militia have rejected this despite of the efforts of the SESG. The Houthi militia only seek to propagate violence in that region. That's why we urge the international community to pressure the Houthis, to bring them back to the negotiating table, to respect the UN truce. We must lift the blockade and open up cities to bring through humanitarian aid. We reiterate our firm position to the need to guarantee stability, to work to guarantee stability in Yemen and pursue international efforts to reach a political solution to the conflict in Yemen and guarantee people and peace and stability for our kindred people of Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Sudan, Ambassador.
Thank you, Vice President. Sudan aligns with the statement made by the groups it belongs to. It's crucial for the issue of technical cooperation to remain a priority for this Council. Technical cooperation must remain a priority in terms of relations between countries. Technical cooperation allows countries to deliver on their human rights commitments. This will allow us to make progress in terms of enjoyment of human rights. Sudan establishes a link between technical cooperation programs and the SDG agenda and calls for aid given to countries in need should be stepped up. In terms of the form of that technical cooperation, it needs to be consistent with needs and priorities of the countries concerned. We're grateful for the reports presented on Yemen and on Cambodia. My delegation welcomes the efforts made by the Yemeni government to restore peace, stability, rule of law, and human rights. We applaud cooperation between the Yemeni government and OHCHR. In spite of numerous challenges facing the country, we urge OHCHR to step up its efforts to increase assistance provided to technical assistance given to Yemen. There's a need to respect the humanitarian truce. Sudan also commends progress achieved in Cambodia and in Georgia. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Kuwait.
Thank you, Vice President. We align with the statements delivered by the regional groups we belong to. We greatly appreciate the role played by independent national institutions in Yemen responsible for human rights. We applaud efforts in documenting human rights violations in that country, and we trust that all those efforts will be crowned with success so as to restore justice and accountability. We stress that OHCHR must pursue its technical assistance to the Yemeni national institutions to enhance their capacities. Today, we have a moral duty to the Yemeni people. This people has suffered on an everyday basis human rights violations at the hands of the Houthi. And despite the firm willingness of the government to restore peace, furthermore, human rights of the Yemenis, these are a right guaranteed under international instruments. The Houthi militia continue to violate the ceasefire, the humanitarian truce, by flouting, scorning the needs of the Yemeni people. That's why the international community must redouble its efforts to put an end to all these practices of the Houthi militia. We stress the need to seek out a political solution to the conflict in Yemen based on the CCG mechanism, the executive mechanism of that initiative, the conclusions of the national dialogue, Resolution 2216 and other international instruments, and we commend Saudi Arabia's role in seeking a resolution to this conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will now proceed with a list of speakers of non-governmental organizations, and I have the honor to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Africa Cultura Internacional.
السيدة نائبة الرئيس السادة أعضاء المجلس الموقر.
President, ladies and gentlemen, we're grateful to the Council for adopting Resolution 4821 on pursuing technical cooperation for Yemen. We appreciate the efforts made by OHCHR to enhance human rights in Yemen. We also commend the role of the Council that is managing the situation in Yemen, and today we want to inform you that due to war and conflict, Yemeni citizens today aspire to ensuring that their rights are guaranteed and that violations of those rights will be sanctioned. Similarly, we laud the efforts of the National Yemeni Commission, which has documented violations. However, that commission needs more resources to bring the perpetrators to justice. We call on the Council to assign greater importance to human rights issues in Yemen, to increase its technical cooperation to Yemen, something that the Yemeni people gravely need. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Organisation Internationale pour les Pays les Moins Avancés.
Mr. President, in the current draft resolution on Yemen, the Council requested the High Commissioner to continue providing capacity building to the government of Yemen. To fulfilling the terms of conflict prevention, post-conflict peace building, the primary objective of capacity building should be focused on preventing violent extremism and re-brainwashing the new generation from extremist ideology. Reports stated that the Houthis and the Muslim Brotherhood have carried out campaigns calling for violent extremism, which led to several terrorist attacks with support of some states. Today, the Houthis refused to extend UN-backed truce and threatened private oil companies to leave the region. They have recruited tens of thousands of children and young generation and implemented in them a spirit of extremism, violence, hostility, and hatred. Meanwhile, the Muslim Brotherhood militias have recruited young generations on behalf of Al-Qaeda and trained them on the use of weapons to carry out suicide missions. Mr. President, capacity building should promote preventing violent extremism, intolerance, and hatred through developing a framework to prevent violent extremism and promote tolerance and respect for diversity. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Afrique Esperance.
Thank you, Chair. The Council should insist on Sri Lanka to devise concrete plans for outside experts to be included in investigations, prosecutions, forensics, and witness protection. The region of land held by the military, investigations into the tens of thousands of forcibly disappeared people, and the removal of the military from civilian affairs in the north and east are areas of concern which need the immediate attention of the Council. The government continues to use the draconian PTA against the Tamils, which is going back on its words to repeal the act and enact a new one in line with international standards. The High Commissioner must insist on total demilitarization in the Tamil areas to allow victims to appear as witnesses. Instead of prosecuting the military personnel, the current and former presidents, prime ministers, and other key officials have regularly retreated and promised that no military personnel will be prosecuted. Call upon all member states to provide full cooperation and assistance to Tamil civil society in support of our efforts to ensure the protection of human rights and the promotion of transitional justice in our own country. Call upon member states to refer Sri Lanka to ICC to investigate and prosecute those accused of war crimes, crimes against humanity, crimes of genocide, and other international crimes as recommended by the High Commissioner. We request of the Third Committee members of General Assembly to support financially OHCHR investigation on Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the Human Rights Information and Training Center.
With the announcement of Houthi group, Madam Vice President, with the announcement of the Houthi group and the rejection of the extension of the truce in Yemen on the 2nd of October, violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, especially the rights of women, children, and other vulnerable groups, are escalating on a large scale, and the burden of monitoring those violations increases, which obliges the Council to direct technical assistance to strengthen and establish monitoring, reporting, and follow-up mechanisms. Madam Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, in light of the government's apparent failure as well as the weak performance of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in addressing these violations as a result of political and material factors, such as the capabilities and the weakness of the human cadre specialized in following up and addressing these violations, we recommend the support of civil society organizations that document and monitor human rights violations and ensure their continuity through partnerships with relevant UN and international bodies and complete comprehensive documentation of human rights violations throughout Yemen. We also draw attention to the importance of your Council's support for accountability efforts and addressing human rights violations. This will play an important role in developing mechanisms to follow up and deter violence and protect civilians and promote real peace. Thank you. Thank you. أعطي الكلمة لبهائي International Community.
Since Yemen was on the agenda of the Human Rights Council, and the Yemeni Baha'is remain systematically persecuted at the hands of the Houthis simply because of their religious affiliation. At present, 24 Baha'is are still under indictment. The 6 Baha'is who were unjustly detained and tortured in Sana'a and later deported from the country have now been branded by the authorities as fugitives, despite the fact that the condition the Houthis gave for their release was their immediate departure, or in other words, exile. The judiciary has approved the confiscation of Baha'i-owned assets and property and the blacklisting of Baha'is, leading to thousands of them being denied the possibility to earn a living and many more under constant surveillance. 2 weeks ago, the authorities threatened and prevented a Yemeni Baha'i from participating in a televised program where he was to be interviewed along with the representative of the Houthis, in a blatant case of violation not only of freedom of religion or belief, but also of freedom of expression. Madam Vice President, the targeted persecution that thousands of Baha'is in Yemen face is in addition to the immense suffering that all Yemenis endure. The international community must continue to call on the Houthis to cease its persecution and cruel treatment of the Baha'is and allow them to practice their faith freely and enjoy their human rights as equals in their society. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the Human Rights House Foundation.
Thank you. The High Commissioner's latest report on cooperation with Georgia highlights that no one has been charged in the case of the arbitrary detention of the journalist Afgan Muqtali. Alongside Human Rights House Tbilisi, we are calling for an effective investigation into his case by the authorities. We continue to be alarmed by the challenges facing civil society in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. The High Commissioner's report highlights draft regulations in Abkhazia that would likely restrict the work of civil society organizations. This is worrying and echoes tightening restrictions in territories across the region. We previously highlighted the criminal proceedings against Tamar Merakashvili. We urge the Council to pay attention to her case in light of the intimidation and restrictions on freedom of movement in South Ossetia that she has been facing. President, we are calling on Georgia to ensure adequate protection for Russian and Belarusian human rights defenders forced to leave their countries and who are temporarily residing in Georgia. Finally, while we welcome the delayed adoption of the National Human Rights Strategy in Georgia in September, we are disappointed that it does not go further in strengthening protections for human rights defenders and those particularly vulnerable to discrimination, including sexual and gender-based minorities. We and our partners stand ready to assist the government in ensuring it provides better protections. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Peace Track Initiative for a joint statement.
This is a joint statement with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Mr. President, we regret that the Houthis rejected the UN brokered proposal for truce extension. The 10th report of the National Commission of Inquiry documented cases of violations of women's rights by all parties, including arbitrary detention, torture and ill treatment such as flogging, unfair trials based on false sex work and espionage claims in Sana'a, increased restrictions for civil society work, including storming shelters of women survivors of violence in Marib, and forced closure of women-led civil society organization in Aden. We are concerned that the National Commission's mandate, which needs renewal every 2 years, is due to end in 2023. We are also concerned that in the last 2 years, the UN Human Rights Office's technical assistance promised to the National Commission has been rather limited. We call on the Council to 1. Request provision of technical assistance to the National Commission, including on gender analysis, investigation of impact of explosive weapons, and use of satellite imagery analysis. 2. Urge for the improvement of women's access to justice by supporting reforms of the judiciary system and the creation of a judicial special police unit for the protection of judges. And 3. Demand human rights trainings for the security and military forces. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Advocates for Human Rights.
Mr. President, the Advocates for Human Rights welcomes the report of the Secretary General on advisory services and technical assistance for Cambodia, along with the report of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Cambodia. We share concerns about the worsening human rights situation. Prime Minister Hun Sen's 37-year rule continues unopposed due to the dissolution of the CNRP opposition party and targeting of its members. As OHCHR documented, many have been arrested and charged with treason or forced to flee the country. Human rights defenders have been harassed and jailed, and crackdowns on NGO and union activists are increasing. Government suppression of the media is systemic. The government employs coercive tactics to silence public dissent, denying Cambodians the rights of freedom of expression, association, assembly, and political participation. We support the Secretary General and Special Rapporteur's recommendations to the Human Rights Council to urge Cambodia to end arbitrary arrest and detention of human rights defenders, political activists, environmental defenders, journalists, and trade union leaders, thoroughly investigate, prosecute, and hold offenders accountable for crimes committed against members of these groups, and repeal or amend all laws that limit the exercise of freedom of expression, assembly, and association, bringing Cambodia's laws into full compliance with international human rights standards. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Fitila.
Chair, today, for more than 5 years, many Tamil families of the disappeared have been at roadside protests demanding to know what happened to their loved ones. The inability to demonstrate progress in searching for the disappeared had led to them expressing disappointment and lack of confidence in the government and the Office of the Missing Persons. Without a credible judicial mechanism to establish criminal accountability for crimes of genocide and grave international crimes allegedly committed in Sri Lanka, any attempt at transitional justice and reconciliation will ring hollow. The government backtracking on the commitment to establish a judicial mechanism with international involvement is particularly concerning. Member states must consider seriously the High Commissioner's recommendation to use universal jurisdiction principles and explore other options to advance accountability in the absence of credible domestic processes. Assaults, threats, harassments, and surveillance of Tamil human rights defenders, lawyers, journalists, and those cooperating with the UN have persisted. Fears of further repression are exacerbated by the government's attempt to introduce new repressive measures through the proposed Counter-Terrorism Act proposed to replace the existing Prevention of Terrorism Act. Given failure of the domestic process, the Council must step up the engagement through measures such as an OHCHR, field office, a country-specific special rapporteur for Sri Lanka, and refer Sri Lanka to the ICC. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Defence for Children International.
Thank you. In April, a ceasefire in Yemen was reached, creating a sense of hope. However, the expected turnaround never happened and crimes continued to be committed by both sides of the conflict. After multiple years of conflict, food scarcity and now flash floods, 80% of the population is in need of humanitarian aid, including almost 13 million children according to the UN. Countries are closing their eyes to the situation. Only 26% of the Yemen humanitarian response plan of 2022 is funded. After the threatening of human rights organizations by both parties of the conflict is a real obstacle to the assistance of endangered population. Women are particularly targeted by direct violence, such as enforced disappearance and murder. During the last week of July, child casualties saw the highest increase since early 2020. Many of these children were forcibly recruited into the armed forces and killed during combat. Some of them are now detained for alleged association with armed groups, and some of them simply disappear. We can't forget that these children are not living, they are barely surviving. UNICEF estimates that more than 2 million children are out of school. We therefore urge all parties to the conflict to extend the ceasefire and to immediately stop attacks on schools. It is essential for Yemeni children to access education in order for them to fulfill their potential. Call all parties to the conflict to immediately cease the recruitment and use of children in the armed conflict. Urge member states to create an international and independent accountability mechanism to provide effective redress to victims. Urge states to increase funding to the Yemen Humanitarian Response Plan in order to combat the world worst humanitarian crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Mart for Peace, Development and Human Rights Association.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I commend the tireless efforts of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in providing technical assistance and capacity building to the least developed countries. And we stress the importance of technical cooperation and capacity building as one of the most important means of supporting national efforts and institutions to improve the human rights situation in the states concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, MAD remains concerned about the Houthis group's continued commission of serious human rights violations against civilians in Yemen. Some of these crimes amount to crimes against humanity and war crimes, including extrajudicial and judicial killings, enforced disappearances, arbitrary arrest and detention, torture, and other forms of ill treatment, as well as other crimes committed by the Houthi group on a large scale against the Yemeni people. The attack that took place in Taiz in July 2022 was an example. This attack resulted in casualties, mostly children under the age of 10. We express our concern over the refusal to extend the truce. Matt stresses the need not to allow those responsible for serious human violations in Yemen to go unpunished. Thank you.
And I now give the floor to the International Support for Human Rights.
Mr. President, if there are constant defining the prevailing violence in Kashmir, it is tear of the countless Kashmiri mothers and wives who lost their innocent sons and husbands at the hands of armed rebels. The victims majorly comprise of teenage boys, social activists, policemen, and government officials who refused to honor demands for them. Over the few years, dozens of serpents were murdered only because they sided with the path of development. The motives are twofold: mainly sustain an atmosphere of fear and disabling governance in the valley. Same fate is shared by social activists who would become popular through their selfless service for the community. Similar to the atrocities of women that go unreported, and uneasy silence abounds these killings as well. It is estimated that over 18,000 civilians have been killed on the onset of violence in the valley. For a long period, the civilians have remained soft target for these groups, who are assassinated either on mere suspension of being informers or during the hostage rescue operation. However, there can be a quantification of psychological and emotional agony caused to these families, as an entire generation has grown up having experienced daily conflict. The most difficult time are faced by women-only households, which number in thousands.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Eliska Relief Foundation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our foundation expresses grave concern about the excessive use of violence by heavy weapons and the failure of the authorities to take measures to protect civilians from the effects of the fighting in recent months between the Libyan factions, where the clashes resulted in the death and injury of more than 200 people. Mr. President, we demand the formation of the United Nations peacekeeping forces in Libya in order to stop the clashes between the various Libyan factions, especially since the victims of the recent military victims are unarmed civilians. We call on the Libyan NGOs in cooperation with the international donor institutions to establish a fund to support civilian victims of the violence and to facilitate access to humanitarian and financial aid for victims, especially those who have lost their homes and properties. We also support the efforts of the independent international fact-finding mission on Libya in calling on the international community to support prompt investigation, and we stress the need for the international mission to cooperate with the relevant authorities in Libya to establish a court to immediately conduct investigation into violations committed by the armed militants in the country. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the Sikh Human Rights Group.
Neurodiversity remains a neglected area of disability. Neurodiversity is a form of hidden disability, as it is not a physical disability. Hence, it is often neglected or treated as a mental disability issue. However, neurodiversity is simply a different way of perceiving and dealing with the world. We believe that with the appropriate training, states, schools, and employers can make life meaningful for children and adults with neurodiversity, particularly those with autism. They will also find that people on the neurodiverse spectrum are constructive, hardworking, and an asset to whoever engages with them. The HRC should make neurodiversity a critical issue and persuade member states to adopt programs and make commitments to raise general and specific awareness around this issue, set up support system and advisory services, encourage employers to understand neurodiversity, and state authorities such as law enforcement agencies to be sensitive to the character of individuals with neurodivergent conditions. This understanding and training can be promoted through the mandate of technical cooperation and capacity building by the OHCHR, with assistance from experts from the WHO. It will meet UN SDGs. It needs to be part of member states' national development objectives. Our organization and affiliates run successful programs to assist community and state institutions to understand neurodiversity and accommodate it. We will be happy to assist. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the Current Institute for Human Rights Studies.
Despite a truce that now looks in danger of collapse, the humanitarian and human rights crisis in Yemen has not ended. The lives and well-being of millions of Yemen citizens continue to be threatened from attacks against civilians. Yet, many governments and this council have chosen silence over the protection of victims and upholding the rule of law. The people of Yemen deserve the same consideration by this council that has been afforded to victims of human rights violations in places like Ukraine, China, and Venezuela. To abandon the people of Yemen out of political convenience not only betrays the fundamental purposes of this council, but also encourages parties to the conflict to continue to use violence and war crimes as means of accomplishing their goals. Peace in Yemen requires a sustained commitment by the international community to ensure accountability and redress for the millions of victims in Yemen, those who have lost a loved one, whose home has been bombed, whose livelihood taken away, or who suffers from malnutrition and disease deserve nothing less. We call on UN member states to give meaning to the pledges they have made and begin to work toward the establishment of an international independent investigative mechanism on Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the International Federation for Human Rights Leagues.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We are deeply saddened and concerned by the lack of space at this Council to debate the situation in Yemen. We urge the members to commit to the improvement of Item 10, which in its current form does not offer any platform to address the complex situation in Yemen. To this day, hundreds of detainees and forcibly disappeared persons are still missing in informal prisons by the Houthi militias and the militias backed by the UAE, which is a member of this Council. These militias do not respond to the judiciary nor prosecution authorities, and all attempts by the mothers to obtain answers from the Yemeni government were unsuccessful. I do not have any answers to offer to these mothers who fear for the lives of their sons. Therefore, I put a question to the distinguished members of this Council, especially those who oppose the interactive dialogue and the report on Yemen. I ask them, how do you explain your persistence to block even minimal dialogue to enhance human rights in Yemen? The absence of mechanisms of accountability have enabled the militias to undermine the Yemeni and international law and have increased the violations against women. The Houthis have a frightening pattern of kidnapping and arresting women activists. They have also carried out death sentences against 11 persons from the Tihama region, and 4 journalists are awaiting execution at any moment. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the International Commission of Jurists.
Madam Vice President, a year after this Council's decision to discontinue the mandate of the group of eminent experts on Yemen, and while the truce has just collapsed, the parties to the armed conflict have made little to no progress to address ongoing and widespread international human rights and humanitarian law violations, or to remedy the harm they have inflicted on civilians. The humanitarian situation in Yemen remains desperate, and in recent weeks, armed clashes have once again increased. Civilians continue to fall victim to shelling, drone strikes, and other attacks. In its last report to this Council, the GE emphasized the extreme suffering for civilians every day in Yemen, the need to realize victims' right to reparation, and reiterated its call on UN member states to refer the situation to the ICC and support the establishment of a criminal accountability-focused investigative mechanism. To fill the accountability gap in Yemen, the ICJ renews its call on the international community, including this Council, the UN General Assembly, and their member states to establish an independent international mechanism to investigate, collect and preserve evidence, prepare files for possible future prosecutions, and publicly report on the most serious violations of international law. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Lawyers' Rights Watch Canada for a joint statement.
Mr. President, Lawyers' Rights Watch Canada and the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute remain alarmed about the situation in Ukraine. During Russia's unlawful invasion of Ukraine, lawyers and human rights defenders in Russian-held areas of Ukraine have been subjected to threats, attacks, judicial harassment, arbitrary detention, and enforced disappearance. In Crimea, vague, ill-defined legislation has been misused to criminalize lawyers and others perceived as critical of Russia or its armed forces. We call on Russia to respect international human rights and humanitarian law, and to unconditionally release and withdraw charges against those detained for performing their professional duties as lawyers or exercising their rights, including peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. We condemn Russia's forcible military mobilization of persons in Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine and within Russia, including peaceful anti-war protesters. We urge all states to cooperate with the Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, including its work with the OHCHR and the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, and including its investigation of root causes in Russia of aggression and atrocity crimes against persons in or from Ukraine. We urge all members of this Council to support the resolution to establish a special rapporteur to monitor, report, and make recommendations on human rights in Russia. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the China Association for Science and Technology.
Hi everyone, this is Wei Jiashan speaking on behalf of China Association for Science and Technology. The alleviation of poverty has been the dream of mankind for centuries, which is a basic right of the people of all countries. China, as the largest developing country, has been committed to improve people's economy, living standards, and put people's yearning for a better life as our goal in the past decades. In February 2021, China declared the completion of the tasks of poverty alleviation. Effective standard is an effective means of social governance and effective technical measures to solve the problem of poverty and improve people's life. China has issued national standards on operation of poverty alleviation projects. This national standard provides effective specification and technical guide for local governments to carry out a related project in accordance with the local condition. China also issued the guideline and evaluation for the construction of beautiful village, providing a guide of planning and construction as well as evaluation. This standard works as the technical guide to improve the quality of the rural area people. Standards can be adopted generally. It is a refining and a summary of the experience and the methodology, which can be widely used and applied. China is very willing to share these effective standards related to poverty alleviation to other countries and provide technical support if needed.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Centre du Commerce International pour le Développement.
Madam Vice President, we attach great importance to cooperation and technical assistance from states to assist states in overcoming the challenges that they are facing in their development goals in the area of human rights. It is now time to proceed to a qualitative and quantitative assessment of the impact of technical assistance on improving democratic governance, as well as on the human rights situations of the most vulnerable groups, through the adoption of a viable public policy for socio-economic and political integration. In light of this, the CECID recommends the promotion of best practice experience in countries when it comes to technical assistance and cooperation. Taking account of the difficulties that many states are facing in this post-COVID-19 period, we call for the main contributing states to generously renew their funding to the voluntary fund. Moreover, despite the environmental disasters and ongoing terrorist attacks in recent months on Somali territory, the results that we've seen, thanks to the efforts of the AU mission and the UN and UNISOM and the involvement of international partners to ensure peace and security, the results are encouraging. In conclusion, we call on the international community to pursue its support and assistance to Somalia to ensure its fragile transition. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Jeunesse Étudiante Samuel.
Thank you, Chair.
Elam Tamil in north and east of Sri Lanka under Sri Lankan security occupation need the High Commissioner's technological presence in north and east of Sri Lanka. Former High Commissioner's successive report on Sri Lanka describe all patterns of genocide against Elam Tamil by Sri Lankan unity stated. The structural genocide of the Elam of Tamil continue unabated. There is no demilitation in Tamil areas. The genocide continues under the assistance of the Sri Lankan armed forces present in the north and east of the Tamil dominate area. Torture and surveillance in the Tamil areas continues. The lack of sufficient progress implementing critical confidence building measures such as the releases of land, the repeal of the Prevention of Terrorism Act and the solution to the pending case under the Act have attacked key constituents that would be instrumental to the comprehensive reform effort. The mother of enforced disappearance who are on the street for the over 2,100 days. They need more technical support from the High Commissioner Office for make complaints to CD and ICC. They urge the Council and accept the conclusion of the High Commissioners to refer Sri Lanka to the ICC, and enough time has been wasted and the time victims cannot wait any longer seeking justice. Also, we ask the Council to name a country special reporter under agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the Society for Development and Community Empowerment. I see delegation is not in the room, so we continue with the list of speakers, and I will give the floor to Association Tendrelle. Speakers not in the room. I will continue with the list of speakers, and I give the floor to the China Society for Human Rights Studies.
Dear President, I'm Wang Wenjing from Huazhou University of Science and Technology, speaking on behalf of the China Society for Human Rights Studies. Since the founding of the People's Republic of China, China has always been committed to providing technical assistance and capacity building to development countries and regions without any additional political conditions, enhancing their capacity for independent development and improving the people's quality of life. Today, China has provided thousands of completed assistance projects to more than 160 countries, carried out tens of thousands of technical cooperation and human resources development projects, and trained more than 400,000 technicians of various types. China has been actively enhancing cooperation in research and teaching institutions between China and Africa. Over the past 2 decades, the number of African students who studied in China has increased by nearly 60 times. China's technical assistance has fulfilled the important commitments made by the President Xi Jinping, which constitutes one of the most important cornerstones in the contemporary international protection of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Youth Parliament for SDG.
Mr. President, technical assistance and capacity building programs are crucial for the promotion and protection of human rights, particularly when utilized to support efforts aimed at empowering victims and providing them with platform and tools to defend and protect their rights. Victims can also be agents of change. They could speak up for themselves about their own stories with their own voices. Still, they require essential assistance to become more professional, more influential, and better heard. More than 7 years ago, Euromed Human Rights Monitor launched its youth-led project, We Are Not Numbers, as an initiative to rehabilitate and build the capacities of victims in conflict areas so that they would be able to write about their experiences, express their aspirations, and introduce other societies to the reality in which they live. Participants have shown remarkable success in making their own voices heard by a large number of people all over the world. Given the significantly positive impact such initiatives can have, the Euromed Human Rights Monitor and the Youth Parliament for SDG would like to draw the attention of countries and relevant UN agencies to the need of providing technical assistance to human rights organizations that work on empowering victims, contribute to their capacity building, and collaborate with them in carrying out and strengthening these operations.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the Association Manoa for Human Rights and Immigration.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We thank the OHCHR for the technical assistance provided to many countries. We think that Yemen is in dire need of this assistance. You all know that the human rights situation in Yemen is very deplorable. Violations by the Houthis are continuing, namely extrajudicial killings, sexual and gender-based violence, mass arbitrary detentions, torture, executions, detention of journalists and others. On the other hand, many international organizations have counted more than 20 decisions and decrees passed by the Houthis between December 2017 and April 2022, aiming at limiting the freedom of women, of movement of women, and even interfering in the outfits of women and their decisions when it comes to family planning. And all these decisions have prejudiced the well-being of women. That's why, in cooperation with the Geneva International Center for Justice, we highlight the importance of providing assistance to associations and NGOs that assist women in Yemen. The Houthis have consistently oppressed women, all women that reject their strict ideas and ideology. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Association Culturelle des Tamouls en France.
Thank you, Chair. Between October 2008 and May 2009, Sri Lankan military forces committed a genocidal war against Tamils by killing more than 169,000 people in a short period of 8 months. In Sri Lanka, there had been nearly 20 commissions of inquiry from 1963 to 2022, but none could deliver justice. It should be noted that the majority of these commissions were related to crimes against Tamils. Events like the above are few examples that can briefly explain why Sri Lanka does not have the capacity to investigate its own crimes. Neither the Sri Lankan police, nor the court, nor the Sri Lankan government has shown any interest in searching for the truth. They continue to release reports about the missing person, about the detainees that are far from the truth. Even state institutions like the Sri Lankan Human Rights Commission, Attorney General's Department have failed us badly. We have no confidence in Sri Lankan domestic mechanisms. The last one, which totally failed, is OMP. The Commission has no power to investigate and punish the offenders. Sri Lanka has failed to fulfill its obligations according to the UN resolution, and now it just became a paper without any value. As requested by the High Commissioner, Sri Lanka should be referred to the ICC to deal with the war crimes, crimes of genocide, and enforce disappearances. We call upon the members of the Human Rights Council to support the Office of Human Rights Council to have a country-specific special reporter for Sri Lanka under Agenda 4. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the Union of Northwest Human Rights Organization.
Madam Vice President, my organization would like to draw the attention of this Council to recent flood situation in Sindh and Pakistan. According to the United Nations Office of Coordination for Humanitarian Affairs, 1.5 million houses in Sindh damaged or destroyed. 1.2 million hectares of agricultural land has been submerged in Sindh. 33 million people have been affected by heavy rains and flood. 130,000 pregnant women needs urgent health service. 6.7 million kilometers of road damaged. 1.4 thousand people are killed. 12.7 thousand people are injured. And 755,000 livestock lost. In addition, since schools and health centers are destroyed, Pakistan's flood and rain have damaged a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Mohenjo-daro, the 5,000-year-old civilization site located in Sindh, Madam Vice President, Pakistan and United Nations have blamed the climate change for the flooding. However, to our understanding, it is not just the climate change, but also the authorities in Pakistan and their appointed government in Sindh are responsible who failed to maintain Sindh's irrigation systems. The authorities are corrupt, culprit, and mafia. Due to their ignorance, inefficiency, negligence, and corruption, Sindhi people lost their lives, crops, livestock, homes, and all their livelihoods. We urge United Nations Human Rights Council to send fact-finding mission to investigate not just climate change issue, but also crime against humanity. I appeal to United Nations to appoint a special envoy for Pakistan-occupied Sindh. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Tamil Usagam.
Thank you, Vice President. The Sri Lankan military forces made a genocidal war against Tamils by killing more than 169,000 people within 8 months from October 2008 to May 2009. The Tamil people is urgently in need for the Council to provide the necessary technical assistance and capacity building to protect their rights. Madam Vice President, the Tamil homeland is occupied by the Sri Lankan military, whose military's composition is 99% Sinhalese. This militarization is against victims of genocide who are Tamils. The current Sri Lankan President and his cabinet members and their reconciliation efforts will not deliver justice to Tamils. Neither Sri Lankan police, the court, or the Sri Lankan government has shown any interest in searching for the truth. They continue to release reports about the missing and detained that is far from the truth. We have no confidence in the OMB. This commission has no power to investigate and punish the offenders. Sri Lanka should be referred to the ICC to deal with war crimes, crimes of genocide and enforced disappearances. We urge the Council to refer Sri Lanka to the ICC to name a country-specific special rapporteur for north and east of Sri Lanka to give technical support to the families of victims of enforced disappeared to get justice with international mechanism. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much. And I now give the floor to the United Towns Agency for North-South Cooperation. I see delegation is not in the room, and we move to the next speaker on the list. And I give the floor to Integrated Youth Empowerment Common Initiative Group.
Respected chairs, I would like to bring the notice of the Council with regard to the lack of proper implementation of UN guiding principles of business and human rights in India. There are the various developmental activities being carried out in the northern state of India, which destroy the forest, river, and environment inhabited by the indigenous people of northern state of India. The so-called developmental projects are initiated without the consent of the people, and the merits and demerits of the project are never discussed with the people inhabited in the region, who have been protecting their natural resources for centuries. All the projects are implemented forcefully with the help of the Indian military and the state armed forces. This could be witnessed in the construction of Lord Subansiri Dam in Arunachal Pradesh, mining of minerals in Karbi Anglong, Assam, coal mining in Nagaland, and Meghalaya railway line construction in Manipur. Respected chairs, my organization believes that India is struggling to implement the UN guiding principles of business and human rights. Therefore, we request the Council to provide the technical assistance on how to properly implement the guiding principles of business and human rights in the northern state of India and India in general. We thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Praha. Praha, you have the floor.
Dear President, in India, the socio-economic prosperity of a country is measured by its GDP growth rate. However, with the negative trend of years, the society, especially middle-class family, experienced mental depressions like Indians' price hike doubled. According to recent data, more than 25,000 Indians died by suicide due to financial crisis from 2018 to till now. This is a really terrible and drastic mortality rate. We urge this Council to look upon this crucial matter and provide some technical assistance to Indian government for sake of people of India. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Indigenous People of Africa Coordinating Committee.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The large-scale illegal migrations from Bangladesh has significantly changed the demographic scenario in Tripura and became the important source to social, economic, and political instability in Northeast India, especially in Tripura, Assam, and Nagaland. Unabated illegal immigrations of Bangladeshi into Northeast India is emerging as a major problem in the state. Better economic prospects and the shortage of local labor are compounded by a critical absence of mechanisms to prevent an influx which is having serious effects of demographic, economic, security, and political ramifications on Northeast India. The illegal migrants are also in possession of valid official documents like ration cards, voter identity cards procured from the state of Assam and West Bengal, where these are available against a small bribe. Despite the absence of precise figure, this estimate underscores the magnitude of the crisis in this tiny state, which has total populations of barely 2 million. Shockingly huge numbers of illegal migrants' names are found in the border list of Assam. Besides, the NGOs found illegal migrants as root cause of terrible crimes like murder, rape, robbery. Government has no mechanisms to control these illegal migrations. My organization wants to appeal this council and its treaty bodies to provide technical assistance and guidance to government of India and Northeast to stop such illegal migrations into Northeast India. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And with this last intervention, we have concluded the general debate on item 10. Excellencies, distinguished participants, I understand that delegations have requested to exercise the right of reply under agenda item 10, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, President. We're forced to exercise right of reply in response to statements by a number of delegations who decided to politicize the discussion of technical assistance and capacity building in the Central African Republic and blame our country for their own geopolitical failures. So I want to state as follows. The CAR authorities independently decide who of the international partners they establish bilateral cooperation with to ensure security for their own population. In turn, we're ready to continue helping Bangui and other African countries to bolster not just the capacity of their security structures on the basis of official requests from the authorities themselves, but provide other assistance in the field of human rights, for example. Yesterday's discussion showed that not all countries like this. That's why certain delegations try every time to blame us on what's happening in CAR. And they have no qualms about using groundless accusations against Russian instructors for those who are trying to help restore peace and order in the country. We ask those delegations to in future refrain from emotional, prejudiced, inaccurate assessments and from casting unfounded aspersions against Russia. The discussion on technical assistance to CAR should be based aimed at providing help to the country concerned and not just getting into endlessly blame those who are providing the CAR with the assistance they're asking for. During many years of the presence of the fresh military, this period saw the most bloody conflicts leading to massive deaths among civilian populations. It's regrettable that French troops were unable to achieve any genuine results or bring peace to the residents of the Republic. However, just as the American occupation of Afghanistan for 20 years, as a result of which hundreds of thousands of civilians died, that seems to be the price for assistance from Western countries, which is always accompanied by chaos, mass killings and destruction. With respect to the statements by a number of delegations on Ukraine, the human rights situation in Ukraine has repeatedly been raised during this session. We all have many times heard the position of those delegations. We would urge you to abstain from further politicizing the general debate on agenda item 10 of the HRC. We've said that the referenda took place in freedom. This was confirmed by numerous international observers, including from the countries of the collective West. If anyone has sincere doubts as to the will expressed by the residents of those territories, we would urge them to visit the regions and have a talk to ordinary people there. I thank you.
Thank you. And this was the only speaker on my list. Are there any more delegations wishing to exercise their right of reply under agenda item 10? I see none. Excellencies, distinguished participants, with this last intervention, we have concluded the consideration of agenda item 10. Excellencies, distinguished participants, this brings us to the end of this meeting. We will reconvene after a lunch break at 1 p.m. to start taking action on draft resolutions. I hereby close the 39th meeting of the 51st session of the Human Rights Council.
比如说口头修 UNOC 给我们更阁下们，尊敬的与会者们，我现在宣布第51届人权理事会第41次会议开始。如果 UNOC 给我们更多的时间的话，如果有额外的时间，我就通知大家，今天我们提出了一个请求，以便能够工作到19点。在就决议草案采取行动之前，我建议我们做一个表决测试。我请秘书处打开表决机的时候，那么表决灯呢将会闪。如果你要投肯定票，那就可以按绿色的按钮；如果是否定，就是红色按钮。那么白色按钮呢，就是零就是弃权。我现在请所有的代表团坐在有一个 vote 的地方呢，可以摁一下这些按钮。代表团们是不是可以核实测试一下这个系统表决系统？苏丹和黑山，苏丹。好，谢谢。我现在请秘书处关掉表决机，谢谢。我们现在开始就决议草案采取行动。我们像以前的理事会会议一样，我们将继续遵循我们的标准程序。我要提醒大家，这个程序只有成员能参加，观察员国只能在2个阶段，可以2种情况下可以发言，就是观察国，就是在提出 建议草案的时候，或者呢，观察员是决议的涉及到的国家，否则的话就不能发言。那么如果有时间的话，观察员国可以有机会做一般性的评论，在所有的决议和决定草案做出行动之后，我们将审议提案草案的审议，我们按照议程项目的顺序，在每一个议程项目下，我们将就他们的提交顺序，就这些文本采取行动。我将告诉大家，如果这个文本还没有准备好的话，作为本理事会主席，我将尽可能的给必要的时间与这个有关各方就文本进行谈判，从而使他们能够共识通过。我要提醒你们，这是非常重要的。根据我们的表决程序，所有程序的动议，比如说口头修改或者请求就分别段落表决，都应该在一般性评论部分宣布。如果没有宣布的话，如果提出了一个程序动议，在这个表决已经开始之后，那么这个动议将被视为不可接受。请大家牢记。我还想提醒大家，表决解释和表决后的一般性评论，只有在就这个具体议程下的最后一个提案草案已经采取行动之后，我现在想提醒大家，根据联大议事规则128条，提案国不允许就他自己的提案或修正来进行解释他的表决。最后呢，每个表决程序的发言时间是3分钟。鉴于我们的时间限制，为了让我们明天结束的时候能够结束这个会议，我希望促请大家遵守分配的时间。如果一个以上的代表团
Excellencies, I have been informed that a number of resolutions are ready for adoption during this meeting, as shown on the screen. All the PBIs received have been posted on the HRC extranet.
A continuación,
Now, we will take up the draft L26 under agenda item 1. The draft statement that has been submitted has been prepared in consultation with all interested sides. Is there any member of the Council wishing to make comments at this stage? I see none. The Secretary has informed me that there are no budgetary repercussions or program repercussions on this proposal. So therefore, I count on the support of all of the delegations present in this room, and I therefore consider that L26, the statement by the President, has been hereby adopted.
Examinaremos ahora.
We will now turn to the draft decision L37 relating to Agenda Item 1, entitled Appropriate Support for the Human Rights Council. This draft decision of a purely practical nature is being presented with the goal of guaranteeing that the offices and departments of the United Nations that support the Council will have sufficient resources to be able to cope with a growing volume of work and activities and giving due attention to all of the agenda items in the most efficient possible manner. Along these lines, an attempt is also hereby reflected to avoid, to the extent possible, the costly lunch schedule. So we would ask the Secretariat to provide the Council with the necessary support so that it can meet at least during 14 weeks to complete its annual program of work. I would like to thank all delegations for their constructive commitment during the 3 rounds of informal consultations to achieve a consensus-based text. I understand that the draft decision that you have in front of you has garnered the support of all of those present in this room in accordance with the information I have. Is any member of the Council wishing to make general comments at this stage? The delegation of China has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. China appreciates the efforts of the President for taking on board all the views. We understand that the stated intention of the President behind the draft decision is to avoid the lunchtime meetings to the greatest extent possible. We trust that the adoption of this draft will help HRC to avoid holding lunchtime meetings, further improve its working method, increase efficiency, and play a more active role in the development of the international human rights cause. We would like to thank the President for his efforts. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Any other delegations wishing to speak? No? If not, then I would like to inform you that the Secretary has told me there are budgetary implications for this draft decision. $1,300,000 US for the year 2023 and $1,600,000 US for the year 2024 and subsequent years. A copy of this statement has been published in the extranet, on the extranet of the Council. With this, I therefore take it that L37 has been adopted. I thank all delegations for having taken into account the President's proposal. That was the last draft for action under Agenda Item 1. Therefore, we will now go on to explanations of a vote and general comments, if there are any, after the vote on the drafts that have just been adopted under Item 1. Would any delegation wish to take the floor on Item 1? I see none. I see no delegations asking for the floor.
Pasaremos ahora.
We will now move on to take action on the next draft under Item 2. First of all, draft L1 Rev 1, promoting reconciliation accountability and human rights in Sri Lanka. To introduce the draft, the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom has the floor to introduce the draft. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Gracias, Senor Presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I have the honour to introduce draft resolution L1, Rev 1, entitled Promoting Reconciliation, Accountability and Human Rights in Sri Lanka, which has been proposed by a group of states comprising Canada, Germany, Malawi, Montenegro, North Macedonia, the United States and the UK. The text is largely based on last year's resolution, but has been updated to reflect some of the key developments over the last 18 months in what has been a rather dramatic time for Sri Lanka. An economic crisis, mass protests and a change in government, all of which have had a significant bearing on the human rights situation in the country. The draft both recognises the challenges which Sri Lanka has faced during the period and acknowledges progress where this has occurred. It reflects some of the more recent concerns outlined in the High Commissioner's report, especially the human rights impact of the economic crisis. And it also addresses several long-standing issues which still need to be addressed. These include the lack of accountability for past violations, the many unresolved cases of enforced disappearances, the need for Sri Lanka to meet its own commitments on the devolution of political authority, as well as the need to uphold the rights of all people in Sri Lanka, including Tamils and Muslims. The main requests in the resolution are in operative paragraphs 8 and 18. Paragraph 8 seeks to continue the work initiated in last year's resolution, which created capacity within the Office of the High Commissioner to collect, consolidate, analyse and preserve information to support judicial and other proceedings. This capacity was set up in response to the lack of progress made by Sri Lanka's domestic legal mechanisms towards accountability for past alleged gross violations of human rights. Unfortunately, this capacity has only been fully operational since May of this year and so requires more time to complete its mandate. We are therefore seeking to extend it for a further period as recommended by the former High Commissioner. Paragraph 18 requests further reporting by the OHCHR and proposes to move from an 18-month timeframe to 2 years. This is in recognition of the severe challenges which Sri Lanka is currently facing, allowing Sri Lanka sufficient time and space to make progress on human rights in what we all recognise is a very difficult context. Mr. President, the UK is a close partner to and a long-standing friend of Sri Lanka. Our ties run deep. We bring this resolution in order to help Sri Lanka address ongoing challenges and in order to encourage progress on reconciliation, justice and human rights. I commend this draft resolution to my fellow members of this Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. La Secretaría me ha informado.
The Secretariat has informed me that the draft L1 Rev 1 has 3 additional sponsors. I now give the floor to member states of the Council wishing to make general comments. The delegation of France has the floor. Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, France thanks the sponsors of this resolution. Indeed, it is important for this Council to continue monitoring the situation of human rights in Sri Lanka and support the authorities in their efforts towards reconciliation and reconstruction that they are already engaged in. In this respect, France welcomes the wish on the part of the new authorities to cooperate with the international community and with UN mechanisms. The resumption of cooperation with the High Commissioner's Office for Human Rights will be an important phase in guaranteeing the protection of the rights of Sri Lankans. It is naturally important for the Council to take into account the extremely difficult situation the country is going through economically. We express our solidarity with the people of Sri Lanka and will continue to join with international efforts to provide it with the humanitarian aid it requires and to meet its long-term challenges. It is in this spirit that France supports this draft resolution. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Any other delegations wishing to make general comments? I see none. I see there are no delegations requesting the floor. So I now give the floor to the country concerned. I give the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Sri Lanka, Ambassador. You have the floor.
Mr. President,
Excuse me, the Minister.
Regrettable that a group of countries have tabled a country-specific resolution against Sri Lanka, despite our continued and constructive engagement with this Council on multiple fronts. It is yet another example of the unfortunate divisions and polarization of this Council, which is contrary to its founding principle that, I quote, "The work of the Council shall be guided by principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity, constructive international dialogue and cooperation." Sri Lanka categorically rejects the draft resolution HRC/51/L1 presented without our consent, despite our effort to engage with the main sponsors. While this resolution may meet the objective of advancing the domestic political consideration of the sponsors, it manifestly unhelpful to Sri Lanka. We call on the members of this Council to reject it by a vote. Mr. President, the list of co-sponsors of the draft resolution amply demonstrates its divisive nature. Last year, many countries braved intense pressure by powerful sponsors and opposed Resolution 46/1 or abstained in the vote. This year, we thank the countries from Asia, Africa, and Latin America who supported Sri Lanka during the informal consultation on this draft. Sri Lanka categorically rejects the resolution, particularly proposal in OP8. As we have repeatedly stated, this so-called external evidence gathering mechanism will have wide-ranging legal and political implications for all countries. Such unprecedented and ad hoc expansion of the mandate of the Council and the functions of a technical secretariat were never envisaged when this Council was established. No sovereign state can accept the superimposition of an external mechanism that runs contrary to the Constitution and which prejudges the commitment of its domestic legal processes. The Council may take note of this. Many countries have already raised serious concern on the budgetary implication of this resolution given its ever-expanding mandates. This is an unhelpful and misdirected drain on the resources of all member states, including the donors, in the midst of an ongoing global crisis. In sharp contrast, we are faced with the dire financial needs of our developing countries to prevent hunger and child malnutrition. We strongly object to the draft resolution pronouncing on domestic economic and financial policy matters which are outside the framework of this forum. Solution to economic and financial crisis faced today by many countries will not be found in the mandate, instrument, or expertise of this Council. Further, it is deeply regrettable that this rambling resolution, running into several pages, ignores the institutional and political stability restored in Sri Lanka, despite the significant political and social challenges. Mr. President, as I outlined in my previous intervention, Sri Lanka remains firmly committed to pursuing tangible progress on human rights throughout our domestic institutions. This includes replacing PTA with a comprehensive national security legislation, the introduction of a constitutional amendment, and a legal framework to strengthen the democratic governance, participation, and rule of law, as well as independent institutional oversight. On reconciliation and human rights, the contours of a domestic truth-seeking mechanism is under advanced discussion as we await the final report of the Presidential Commission. We are of the firm view that any solution should be within the constitutional framework of a sovereign Sri Lanka. On our further engagement with this Council, we look forward to domestic consultation in preparation for our upcoming UPR process. Today, Sri Lanka is making gradual and difficult progress in resolving severe financial situation we are facing. Globally, it is clear that the causes for the prevailing economic crisis affecting all countries are not entirely internal, but also external. We are deeply concerned about many hardships faced by our people and have made provisions for the necessary social protection measures. Sri Lanka has overcome many challenges in the past. We have ended decades of separatist terrorism, successfully managed the human health dimension of the pandemic, and despite economic challenges, succeeded in maintaining a high rank in the Human Development Index, which is the highest in the region. We aspire to build on the economic, political, and social stability restored in the recent months with the support of all our people, including through outreach to the overseas Sri Lankan, in a just, fair, and inclusive society which realizes the full enjoyment of the human right and fundamental freedom. In these circumstances, it is regrettable that this resolution has been tabled. The North-South divide is clearly reflected in the consideration of this resolution as well as in the voting results of the previous resolution on Sri Lanka. For all the above reasons, Sri Lanka rejects this draft resolution and requests the members of this Council to reject this resolution by a vote. Thank you.
Le agradezco al distinguido ministro de...
I would like to thank the distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka for his presence here in this room this afternoon. The Secretariat has told me that there are budgetary implications in the program for this resolution to the tune of $6,092,300 US. A copy of the declaration has been published on the Council's extranet. I would now like to give the floor to members of the Council that wish to offer explanations of vote prior to voting. Pakistan. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Pakistan has been a consistent advocate for dialogue and cooperation as preferred means to advance universal respect for and enjoyment of human rights. We strongly believe that engagement and consent of the country concerned remain crucial to address human rights concerns and promote compliance with states' international human rights obligations. We appreciate Sri Lanka's active and constructive engagement throughout the informal consultations on the draft text. This demonstrates its commitment to cooperate with international human rights machinery, including this Council. We share the concerns of Sri Lanka and a number of other states that the draft text is intrusive and goes beyond the core group's originally conceived objective of promoting accountability and reconciliation in Sri Lanka in the context of civil war in 2009. The current text delves into areas such as governance, economic management, corruption, rule of law, democratic process, as well as Sri Lanka's engagement with international financial institutions. This level of scrutiny and intrusion, as envisaged in preambular paragraphs PPs 8, 9, 10, and operative paragraphs 4, 5, and 8, would not be even acceptable to any sovereign state, including the core group. Mr. President, L1 Rev 1 fails to condemn the horrendous terrorist acts committed by LTTE and shies away from a call for accountability of the LTTE and its sponsors and financiers. During the course of informal consultations, a number of states had explained that OP8 lacks balance, proportionality, and consistency, including with other key elements of the draft text. For example, PPs 5 and 17 of the text reaffirm the sovereignty of Sri Lanka and welcome its continued engagement with the UN and its human rights mechanisms. However, these provisions are at complete variance with the legally untenable external accountability mechanism as foreseen in OP8. We note that such provisions are neither grounded in nor are drawn from the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, the founding UNGA Resolution 60/251 and the IB package. Mr. President, at a critical time when the people of Sri Lanka expect demonstration of global solidarity and support to overcome its economic challenges, which are not entirely of Sri Lanka's own making, the core group chose a path that has the potential to exacerbate the problems instead of improving the situation, including with respect to the ongoing efforts towards accountability and reconciliation. Although impacts may vary depending on level of development and economy's resilience, but the last 3 years have clearly shown that no single country can claim immunity from the devastating socio-economic impacts of COVID, global liquidity crunch, and the climate catastrophe. Mr. President, in view of these reasons, Pakistan delegations call the draft resolution to vote and would vote against it. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Brazil is recognized.
Muito obrigado, caríssimo senhor presidente. Brazil thanks the core group for presenting the draft resolution on Sri Lanka. We take note with appreciation of the engagement of Sri Lanka during the negotiations as a proof of goodwill. We agree with their comments regarding the need to avoid politicization of the work of the Council and reiterate our position that the engagement and cooperation of the concerned country is key to the success of the Council's initiatives. While we acknowledge that progress was achieved on the ground in Sri Lanka, we understand that many countries believe the situation of the country remains of interest to this Council. We welcome the fact that the final text acknowledges the efforts undergone by the government to address the ongoing economic crisis and its commitment towards institutional reforms, but also highlights the important challenges regarding the full enjoyment of the human rights and fundamental freedoms of the Sri Lankan people. During the negotiations, Brazil proposed amendments aimed at bringing balance to the text and within the Council's agenda. We would like to thank the core group for incorporating some of our proposals, which rendered the final text a more constructive approach. We regret, however, that our proposal to strengthen the technical cooperation and assistance dimension of the text was not taken on board. In light of recent Sri Lankan efforts and constructive engagement, it is our belief that this resolution should have a greater focus on the responsibility of the international community to support the country in its recovery, including through international cooperation and assistance. We believe this resolution would be better framed under our agenda item 10. In light of these considerations, Brazil will abstain on the draft resolution on Sri Lanka. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Japan has the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente. Japan has duly taken note of the discussion on the human rights situation in Sri Lanka, including at the informal consultation with the member states and various stakeholders. While recognizing the work done by the Sri Lanka government to date, Japan is of the view that various steps will need to be taken in order to improve the human rights situation and to foster reconciliation in the country. Japan therefore emphasizes the need for Sri Lanka to take further necessary measures. The government of Sri Lanka is primarily responsible for improving the human rights situation in the country. Japan strongly believes that the government's own initiative, efforts, and commitments are indispensable to achieve real change on the ground. Japan considers it preferable for the international society to foster Sri Lanka's own efforts to improve the human rights situation in the country. For these reasons, Japan will abstain from voting on this draft resolution. Gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you. China has the floor.
Mr. President, China appreciates the Sri Lankan government's commitment to promoting and protecting human rights, advancing sustainable socio-economic development, improving living standards, protecting the rights of vulnerable groups, facilitating national reconciliation, and combating terrorism. As a long-time friendly neighbor of Sri Lanka, China firmly supported in safeguarding national sovereignty and independence, maintaining social stability, and achieving economic recovery. We believe that the Sri Lankan government is able to lead the people to overcome the difficulties. We note with appreciation that the delegation of Sri Lanka actively participated in the consultations on the draft resolution with the utmost goodwill and made constructive comments. However, regrettably, the co-sponsors obstinately ignored the views of the country concerned, especially its opposition to extending the mandate of the Special Rapporteur. We regret this. This draft resolution, in disregard of the efforts and achievements made by the government in promoting and protecting human rights, and without consent by the country concerned, is yet another product of a politicization, and will by no means play any positive role in the promotion and protection of human rights in Sri Lanka. The work of this Council should be guided by the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity. All parties should promote and protect human rights through genuine dialogue and cooperation, and refrain from adopting double standards and politicizing human rights issues. China maintains that all countries should abide by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, respect the sovereignty and independence of other countries, and reject the practice of using human rights as a pretext to interfere in the internal affairs and undermine the sovereignty of other countries to the detriment of international cooperation. In view of the above, China will vote against draft resolution L1 Rev 1 and calls on other members of this council to jointly reject it. I thank you, sir.
Gracias.
Thank you. India has the floor.
Ambassador.
Mr. President, as an immediate neighbor, India has substantively contributed to the relief, rehabilitation, resettlement, and reconstruction process in Sri Lanka after 2009. More recently, since January this year, India has stepped up and provided unprecedented assistance to the people of Sri Lanka to face the challenges of the recent economic crisis. In finding a lasting and effective solution for peace and reconciliation in Sri Lanka, India has always been guided by the two fundamental principles of support to the aspirations of the Tamil for equality, justice, dignity, and peace and unity, territorial integrity and sovereignty of Sri Lanka. While we have taken note of the commitments by the government of Sri Lanka on issues of implementation of the commitments in the spirit of the 13th Constitutional Amendment, meaningful devolution, and the early conduct of provincial elections, we believe that the progress towards the same remains inadequate. Accordingly, we urge the government of Sri Lanka to work meaningfully towards early implementation of these commitments. Achieving prosperity for all Sri Lankans and realizing the legitimate aspirations of Tamils of Sri Lanka for prosperity, dignity, and peace are the two sides of the same coin. Mr. President, India will continue to work with Sri Lanka and the international community to attain the related objectives of legitimate aspirations of Tamils of Sri Lanka and prosperity for all Sri Lankans. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Tiene la palabra República de Corea.
The Republic of Korea has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea notes with appreciation that the government of Sri Lanka has made various efforts to promote national reconciliation, reconstruction, and prosperity. These efforts notably include the establishment of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry, the operation of Office of Missing Persons, and the Office of Reparation, the introduction of the National Reparation Policy and Guidelines, and the proposed amendment to the Constitution, which aims to restore the independence of key national institutions and the judiciary. We take particular note that the government of Sri Lanka has made continued efforts to promote the human rights situation even during this difficult time of economic crisis. As a country which went through a turbulent period of democratization, the Republic of Korea has been a supporter of Sri Lanka's transitional process. When assuming the chairmanship of the UN Peacekeeping Commission in 2017, Korea convened the first meeting on Sri Lanka. We also supported the country's transitional process through the Peace Building Fund. However, in the hope that Sri Lanka will achieve tangible progress through the close cooperation with the international community, including the UN human rights mechanisms, the Republic of Korea has decided to maintain its previous voting position on the resolution. We will continue to examine our stance as we closely monitor the progress on the ground. The Republic of Korea sincerely hopes that the government of Sri Lanka will make further advancements in national reconstruction and reconciliation, and also looks forward to closely cooperating with the Sri Lankan government. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Venezuela has the floor. Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Venezuela would like to reiterate its position on the selective practice of some countries in this council with merely political means. They present initiatives such as this draft resolution L1 Rev 1 against the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. Such initiatives do not have the support of the concerned country and violate the principles of the respective sovereignty and non-meddling in the domestic affairs of states. We're deeply concerned that in the text of the draft resolution, it continues to be an effort to give competencies and attributions to the Office of the High Commissioner to collect criminal evidence for future criminal trials for the criminal body, in violation of the mandate included in Resolution 48-141 of the General Assembly that created it. It is regrettable that the sponsors of the draft resolution insist on imposing, through this hostile initiative, monitoring and oversight mechanisms against Sri Lanka without its consent, thereby ignoring the great efforts made by its government in fulfilling its commitments in the area of human rights since the restoration of peace in 2009. Mr. President, Venezuela rejects, given that it is unjustified, all external affairs and meddling in the domestic affairs of Sri Lanka as it seeks out its national reconciliation. We warn about the great risk of draft resolutions that are biased with interventionist slants, that reiterate selective procedures of some hegemonic countries and their allies in this council, affronting the independence and sovereignty of countries in the South. Thus, we condemn the selectivity, politicization, and double standards clearly visible in these initiatives that set forth hostile mandates with which they try to preserve dark interests of those that drive them, and that additionally financially bleed out the system with over $6 million that could have been better used to support the least developed countries in their human rights situations. This practice of wasting money seems to be all too common these days in the Council. Some governments of the countries that promote these draft resolutions have carried out and continue to carry out severe violations of human rights, and against them, unfortunately, no similar initiatives are made. They actively cooperate with the mechanism, this office, and the Office of the High Commissioner, Sri Lanka does, showing the great achievements made in its people's promotion and protection of human rights. This draft resolution is unjustifiable, and Venezuela is against draft L1, Rev 1, voting against when the voting comes, urging further all members of the Council to act in a similar way. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I don't see any additional requests for the floor. At the behest of the delegation of Pakistan, the Council will now move to a vote, a registered vote on draft resolution L1, Rev 1. I would like to ask the Secretariat to open the voting machine and request delegations to register their vote, please.
Han registrado todas las delegaciones su voto.
All delegations have registered their vote. I would ask you to please double check and see if your vote is properly reflected on the screen. And if so, I would like to ask the Secretariat to close the voting machine. The results of the registered vote as I was saying, the results of the registered vote are as follows. 20 votes in favor, 7 against, 20 abstentions, which is why draft L1, Rev 1, Promotion of Reconciliation, Accountability, and Human Rights in Sri Lanka is adopted. A copy of the voting's results will be uploaded shortly on the extranet.
El Consejo examinará ahora.
The Council will now consider draft decision L6. Debate on the situation of human rights in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, China. The delegation of the United States of America is recognized. They will be presenting this draft resolution.